This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
Hello, very good evening. It's 7:05. Welcome to the programme. It's Iain Dale here with you until 10. Now, the SNP has today promised to ditch what it called the pernicious two-child benefit cap in Scotland as it challenged Labour to help end the policy north of the border. Now, the Finance Secretary, Shona Robertson, made the surprise pledge as she set out the Scottish Government's budget at Holyrood, saying the cap had caused misery for families. Now, anti-poverty charities have long called for an end to what they call the cruel cap, brought in across the UK by the Conservatives in 2017, which prevents parents from claiming universal credit or child tax credit for a third child. Now, of course, they've already said that they would reinstate the winter fuel allowance, which the Labour government withdrew from about 9 million pensioners across the country back in July. So, what I want to ask you is this. The SNP seem to be carrying out Labour policies. It's in a way politically quite a clever move, given that Labour are the main challengers to the SNP in Scotland. They forced Anna Sarwar, the Labour leader, to match the pledge on winter fuel benefits, which of course puts Keir Starmer in a very difficult position. So do you think that there is now a real prospect of the Labour government in Westminster doing what the SNP government has done in Edinburgh? Are you with me at the back? 0345 6060 973. Well, let's get more on this from Gina Davidson, LBC Scotland political editor. Gina, very good evening to you. Now, this was a bit of a surprise today, wasn't it? Was anybody expecting Shona Robertson to restore to abolish the two-child benefit cap?
No, I think you're right. It was a real rabbit out of the hat moment, Iain. It came in the last section of her budget speech today. It hadn't been trailed at all. Sometimes you get a sniff of what might be coming. We really didn't get any indication from the government that they were looking at this. And one of the reasons why is, of course, because for years they've said that they couldn't do anything about it. This was one policy too far for the Scottish Government to mitigate because they didn't have the money to do it, or because it was absolutely a reserved issue, because, as you say, it comes through the universal credit benefit, which is dealt with the DWP. Social Security Scotland doesn't have those powers. So it was a real surprise to hear that from her at the end of her budget speech today. And as you say, absolutely throwing down the gauntlet to Scottish Labour ahead of those 2026 Holyrood elections, and also to Keir Starmer's government. She issued a real challenge to him over the costings of scrapping this cap.
Be in no doubt the cap will be scrapped. My challenge to Labour is to work with us, give us the information that we need. But either way, let me be crystal clear. This government is ending the two-child cap, and in doing so will lift over 15,000 Scottish children out of poverty.
Now, that information that she says the Scottish Government needs, Iain, is basically the names of the people who could benefit from the Scottish Government mitigating this policy. They do not have those details. We know already, of course, the Scottish Government pays a child payment, a Scottish child payment. That's a unique benefit in Scotland, and that is to people who are already on universal credit. They can apply for that through Social Security Scotland. This would be a different matter altogether. They would need the information from the DWP directly to be able to pay that out to people that might qualify. Of course, she has also said that could take some time, and that this is really just kick-starting the idea to mitigate, and it would be not until 2026, 27 that money might actually be handed over to families in need of this payment. And of course, what do we have, Iain, in 2026 but a Holyrood election? So this is going to be, without a doubt, a key pledge of the SNPs as we go into that election. And as I say, it's a challenge to Labour to match that, to do something about that, and of course puts pressure on Anna Sarwar to apply that pressure at Westminster. He has already said he doesn't like the two-child cap. He wants his party to scrap it. Keir Starmer adamant so far that he's not going to do that. So a really interesting moment, I think, in those Scottish-Westminster relations, which both have been so keen to reset.
And there's no guarantee that this budget will pass, is there? Because the SNP now doesn't have a majority in the Scottish Parliament since the departure of the Greens from the government. So what happens if the budget doesn't pass?
Well, if the budget doesn't pass, now there's some way to go yet. It goes to the committee stage first and gets scrutinised, and there'll be all those kind of intra-party negotiations. All the opposition parties, of course, have come out of the chamber today and said, well, it's not good enough, it's not doing this, it's not doing that, there's not enough money being spent here, we want to see more of that. So those negotiations will carry on, and ultimately the final vote on this budget will be in February. If it doesn't pass at that stage, then the government will have a number of days, around 28 days, to come back with another budget and see if that one can get passed. But ultimately, Ian, if it fails again, then we go to an early election. So we could end up with a Holyrood election in 2025. I don't think any of the parties here really want that to happen. They're geared up, they're heading for the election in 2026. That's fast enough for them. I don't think they want that to happen. So, I think it's unlikely that the budget will fail at the final hurdle. But who knows? It could, if it doesn't pass, we will have an early election in 2025, and then we'd have to have another one in 2026, such as are the rules of the Scottish Parliament.
Gina, thank you very much. That's Gina Davison, LBC's Scotland political editor. I wonder what you make of this, not just if you're in Scotland, but south of the border too, because I don't think anybody expected Labour, when they came into power, to abolish the winter fuel allowance for many pensioners. And I think a lot of people expected them to abolish the two-child benefit cap. Well, they haven't done that, but the government in Scotland has. And they've said they would restore the winter fuel allowance. So the SNP, in some ways, is stealing Labour's clothes. How much of a difficulty is that going to be for Labour in Scotland and indeed in Westminster? Because Anas Sarwar has already said that he wants to restore the winter fuel allowance to pensioners in Scotland. Well, if he now says, and we want to abolish the two-child benefit cap for child benefit, can you really have the Labour Party in Scotland singing from a completely different hymn sheet to the Labour Party in Westminster? I would argue not. And if you do, that's not an election-winning strategy, is it? What do you think? 0345 6060 973. Ros Foyer joins me, General Secretary of the Scottish Trades Union Congress, the STUC. Ros, thank you very much for coming on the programme. This is a right mess from a Labour point of view, isn't it?
Well, I think it was definitely some clever pre-election manoeuvring that we've seen from the Scottish Government today. They've gone for the deeply unpopular policy failings of the UK Labour Government and pledged to step in and plug those gaps. And it does leave the Labour Party in Scotland with quite a difficult predicament. We would welcome the moves that the Scottish Government has made. These are really important areas for ordinary people. We've also seen today, real investment in public services and in infrastructure. And all of these things are really, really important. But what we didn't see was longer term, deeper policies that challenge the economic inequalities we're facing in Scotland. So we would have liked to have seen more policies around redistributing wealth, rebalancing the imbalances in our economy through wealth taxes and other measures that we haven't seen today.
I suppose it indicates that the SNP is still there and actually can do things that are quite clever. It also indicates that devolution can work in some ways for Labour, but not in others. And I suppose that was always going to be the case with devolution. You're never going to be able to necessarily have the same policies all over the United Kingdom in the same party. But how do you think Labour should react to this? In Westminster, I mean.
Yeah, I think you're right about devolution having the capacity to create Scotland pace setting on anti-poverty measures and on a range of other measures, and we would want to see that. We'd want to see that leverage being used to push the UK government for the benefit of all the UK citizens on some of these issues. But at the end of the day, the money has to come from somewhere for these things, and we've seen a real, a rabbit out the hat moment, yes, but it's a real box of tricks, because what we've seen today on the two-child cap is a promise to deliver it. We're not going to see the delivery. That's getting left until next year. And what they're asking for is the UK government to give them the assistance to work out how to implement that delivery. And it very handily falls when the election is due to fall, when they'd be looking to do that. So I think that there's quite a lot of negotiations still to go around this, but I think undoubtedly a very clever political move on the SNP's part.
Does this, as the STUC, does this provide you with a dilemma? Because obviously the Labour Party grew out of the trade union movement. You're temperamentally, I suppose, guided to support Labour. But when the SNP produces policies, which you might well think, well, these are actually Labour policies, I mean, do you then row in behind the SNP, even though it's sort of maybe feels a little bit uncomfortable?
Well, on the contrary, the STUC is not affiliated to any political party. And, you know, we've worked with the SNP government. We've worked in the past with Labour governments in Scotland. At the end of the day, we'll work with any government that is willing to take progressive measures to close the gaps and inequalities that we see in our economy. Our job is very much to get the best deal for ordinary working people out of our governments, and that involves us in working very closely with whoever happens to be in government in Scotland. So, you know, at the end of the day, we'll give credit where credit's due, and we'll criticise where that criticism's due. My view is that if we can have a race to the top rather than a race to the bottom on some progressive policies, then that's all to the good.
Ros, thank you very much indeed. That's Ros Foyer there, General Secretary of the Scottish Trades Union Congress, the STUC. We'll come to your calls in a moment. What do you make of this? Because I think politically it's very interesting that the SNP is stealing Labour's clothes, providing Labour with a real challenge, both in Edinburgh and in Westminster. And what do you think more widely that this implies for devolution? Because in a sense, it shows both the strengths and weaknesses of devolution, doesn't it?
Iain Dale on LBC.
Lee says, please stop lying. Scrapping the cap is not a Labour government policy. I didn't lie, but it is quite clear that it is Labour's general policy to increase benefits, not to cut benefits. And the pressure from within the Labour Party for the Labour government to do such a thing is pretty strongly, as you know. Ben's in Clacton. Hello, Ben.
Hello, Ian. Yes, well, I did warn the Chancellor. I wrote to the Chancellor several times before the winter fuel allowance was cut and told her exactly what was going to happen. And the original win by the Scottish Nationalist Party, they were a fringe party. People were laughing at them at the beginning. But the Labour Party kept talking about left-wing policies and helping people and everything else, but never actually done much when they were actually in charge in Scotland. And of course, what the SNP are doing, what they're doing at the moment, they're stealing the true Labour policies. And this is a problem for them now, because obviously the Holyrood elections, when they come up, they'll be able to say, vote for us and we'll restore the two-child policy and we'll restore the winter fuel allowance. And Labour won't have an answer to that if the Westminster government keep insisting on carrying on with it. It's just, these are supposed to be intelligent people we've got. I waited 14 years or more to actually have a Labour government, and they've just made a pig's ear of it. I've now sent back my card and tried to set up a community business to try and help the pensioners themselves from freezing to death this winter, which was prophesied by in 2017, and to say that they're better off is rubbish, because you can't take £200 or £300 a week away from people and then say they're better off, because they're not.
And are you getting support from your local MP for this initiative?
Yes, I've written to Nigel Farage, and his parliamentary private secretary has written back, so hopefully we'll get some movement on this from Nigel Farage. I don't care who helps. My politics is not the same, but I'm now apolitical, and I don't care who helps. If it keeps people alive, then I'm all for it, no matter what party is helping.
And you genuinely believe that there will be people in Clacton, because of this policy, this winter, who will die?
I genuinely believe that, because it's happened in the past. In fact, there was a lot more died in the past because of the cuts to benefits originally. And the cold doesn't just kill you from the point. I mean, I taught first aid for 12 years, all over the place in the large London borough I was in, and I know how hypothermia. All you have to do for the beginning of hypothermia is your temperature has to go down by 2 degrees. That's all. Then it starts, and it continues, and you just die. And I'd done the care system in the 80s, and I worked in the care system when I retired from the job in London. And people need support, and if they don't get it, then they will die. I mean, it's a terrible thing to say, and I hate saying it because it frightens people. But people need to be frightened because, if it was I've written to MPs saying if it was your mum or dad or granddad, would you implement this policy if it was them sitting in a chair freezing to death? I mean, it's just not on. And I supported the Education Union a couple of months ago when they were demonstrating outside Parliament to have universal free school meals for all children in this country, because you would have hit three birds with one stone. You would have improved the National Health Service because of the fact less people gradually over time would actually die from highly processed foods and all the diseases connected with that. And that would be a way to do the two-child, get rid of the two-child policy, because you would be giving people the money to feed their children by not having to pay for school meals. So, it's totally... I'm very disappointed in the Labour government at the moment. They really need to change direction.
You see, what I've never understood about this policy... I've said in the past that I think pensioners, if you divide the age demographics up, pensioners are the richest age group. And I think there is a case for withdrawing some benefits from richer pensioners. But that's not what we're talking about here. This is pensioners who don't qualify for pension credit and have earnings of more than, is it £12,000? Something is £12,000 or £13,000.
No, it's 11,300 for a single person and 300 and odd for a couple. I mean, that's what it works out at. And that's half the minimum wage.
So there are people... I mean, if they were going to have a limit, why didn't they say, well, if you earn over 25,000 or something, or restrict it to the sort of lower bands in the council tax bracket? There are ways that they could have done this, which would not have upset and also put in danger so many people.
Yeah, they were told that by experts, money saving expert, a brilliant man. And others, not just him, but others were telling them, the Child Property Action, all that, the property action groups that you've got were telling them that already. And they just had cloth ears, something in their ears stopping them listening, and ploughing on with a policy which will run and gives other parties the ammunition to win the next election and ensure that Labour government are only one term. But they could have reintroduced the savings part of the pensioner credit, because if you put, I won't get it because I used to use it to help my children who needed support. But and I don't mind not having it because other people that need it but more than me can get it. It was the way they implemented it. And the level of when you don't get it is extremely low. And the savings credit part of it, which the Conservative Party got rid of in 2016, she should have reintroduced that. And then all the people that were 2 or 3 quid above the threshold would have still been protected and still had the winter fuel allowance.
But if they did amend this, and at the moment they show no sign of backing down on it at all, but if they did amend it to essentially follow what the SNP have done, I'm not sure they'd get any political credit for that, would they? Which means that they probably won't do it.
Well, they have to do it because this will run and run and run for the whole term of Parliament. And if they don't do it, then they're just crazy. They're just stupid. I mean, supposed to be highly intelligent people have got no common sense.
You can put it that way, or you can say that the Treasury civil servants pull the wool over the Chancellor's eyes.
Well, apparently, according to what I've read, now what you read in papers is not always true, as you know yourself. But what I read about the Chancellor herself, she had this policy in her mind long ago, long before they were ever anywhere near government. And of course, I suppose the Prime Minister couldn't really. He probably thought. I mean, he said himself about a pensioner. He sat there and said, "Oh, it's terrible, these pensioners." And then, of course, he somersaulted on that because I think he was frightened to challenge the Chancellor, basically. And it's a shame.
I don't know about that.
People could have been helped if he had overruled that and said, reinstate the savings part of the policy, then the majority of people who will be affected by this very badly wouldn't have lost the winter fuel allowance because their little pension that they were told if you save up for, then we'll give you the winter fuel allowance because as long as you're not vastly above the threshold, maybe £5 or £6 a week or whatever, then we'll still give you the winter fuel allowance and all the other benefits connected with that. It's just a total shame that they've actually done this. And the SNP will make a meal of this. And to a certain extent, I'd be back in the SNP because people will not die if they reinstate it. And Labour in Scotland will be slaughtered if they don't actually back it up. That will cause a split in the Labour Party, which the other parties will exploit. And that's a big problem.
We will see. Ben, thank you very much indeed. Wesley says, "Hi, Ian. What the SNP did was political. Surely not. They know that there is an election in 2 years, so this rabbit out of the hat is them getting ready. How are they going to fund it? Plus, central government has given devolved nations almost $3 billion more, so technically the Labour government has funded this." Now, that is an interesting point because I don't know whether this will be affected by the so-called Barnett formula. And if the SNP do this, whether they might actually have to hand some money back. I don't know the details of that. But it is going to be interesting to see how the funding will work. And it'll also be interesting to see whether all the other parties in the Scottish Parliament combine to vote down this budget, which is possible because the Greens have said they're not going to support it. The Conservatives clearly won't. The Liberal Democrats, though, have been a little bit equivocal. So it would be odd to see the Liberal Democrats coming to the support of Labour, but stranger things have happened. Keep your calls coming on this, 0345 6060 973. Is this a bit of a political masterstroke by the SNP? Does it put Labour in a very difficult position both in Edinburgh and in Westminster? And do you think in the end that Labour is going to back down on both the winter fuel allowance and the two-child benefit cap? 0345 6060 973. Now, here is some very interesting breaking news. The French National Assembly has just voted to say it has no confidence in Prime Minister Michel Barnier. Under the terms of the French Constitution, he must now resign. Well, we'll be crossing to the other side of the channel very, very shortly.
Iain Dale, text 84850. This is LBC.
7:33 on LBC. You're listening to Iain Dale. We'll come back to the decision by the SNP to abolish the two-child benefit cap and indeed the winter fuel allowance cut in just a few moments' time. 0345 6060 973. But first, as you heard in the news there, we broke the news just before the news that the French Prime Minister Michel Barnier has now got to resign after the National Assembly voted to say it had no confidence in him. That is a major development, isn't it? And as you heard from Amelia there, 60 years, this is the first time this has happened in 60 years. So a historic night in Paris. I wonder what the consequences of this are going to be for President Macron. Now, I've met Michel Barnier myself, and much as I sort of almost didn't want to like him. I kind of did. It was when his diaries came out in this country in English, and he came into the studio. And I wasn't sure we'd get on because obviously my views on Brexit are well known, which are exactly the opposite of Michel Barnier. But he was a very engaging guest, I have to say. Spent 45 minutes with him. He then said, because he was thinking about running for the presidency, and he then said to me that if he won the presidency, I could go and interview him in the Elysee Palace. So I was rather hoping he would do that, but that didn't work out. And then he was called back to the colours by President Macron a few months ago to rescue the situation in Parliament. He was seen as a sort of figure who might be able to bring the two extremes together. He didn't. Well, I think he was always up against it, really. It was never going to be an easy task for him to do. And of course, today we get the we get the results of that. So this is not going to be good news for President Macron, because it's quite difficult to see how on earth he manages to appoint a new Prime Minister who would have the confidence of Parliament. Well, let's get the latest from John Litchfield, who's a journalist who's a columnist for the news site The Local. First began reporting on French politics in the late 1990s. John, very good evening. Just to tell us how we've got to this point.
How we got to this point? Well, but Barnier's been Prime Minister only for 3 months. He's now, as being voted out tonight, the shortest lived, but also the oldest in terms of age, Prime Minister of the Fifth Republic. It was almost, very, very unlikely he could bring things off. He was confronted with a parliament which is split into 3 mutually detesting blocks, and he had only one of those blocks, a central block of 220 deputies, centre and centre-right, on his side. He was always going to rely. The left was always going to be against his attempts to reduce the French deficit and retrench on the budget. The far right seemed to be ready to play along with him, at least not to censure him and bring down his government. But that's changed in the last couple of weeks. Marine Le Pen's rhetoric has become much more negative. She says that's because she isn't happy with things in the budget. It coincides almost exactly with the moment she realised in her trial for embezzling €7 million from the European Parliament that she may well be banned from politics next March when the judgment on that trial comes out. And so she perhaps no longer feels any need to prop up a system which she feels is about to kick her out of politics.
So what happens now?
What happens now is that Macron is still president, and he can appoint a new prime minister who he likes and when he likes, and it's probably going to be either tomorrow or the day after. It takes a long time to make these decisions, but there are 2 or 3 reasons why he's going to act very quickly on this occasion. One, he's got sort of the world's great and good coming to the reopening of Notre Dame Cathedral on Saturday. He doesn't want to be faced with in the middle of a political crisis. He still will be, but at least he'll have a government if he can appoint one by then, or a prime minister. Secondly, he's under pressure now. People are saying, he's the source of all this problem. Maybe he should resign. Maybe we should have a new presidential election. He wants to therefore seem to be active and in charge of things to forestall that kind of pressure. But also, France has another problem. It wasn't just Barnier that was rejected tonight. It was the 2025 budget. So unless something happens, the government technically could close down on January the 1st for lack of any legal right to claim any more taxes or spend any more money in the new year. They will have to pass an emergency finance bill which will roll over the 2024 taxes and spending. That will happen. The opposition won't stop that. But you need a government to propose it. And as I understand the Constitution, it's not really possible for Barnier as kind of interim caretaker prime minister to do that. So Macron has to move quite quickly to appoint a new prime minister for that and those other reasons.
But who would that be? Because I don't see if Barnier couldn't bring the 2 extremes together. I mean, is there somebody else out there who might, or will Macron be forced to appoint somebody from the left-wing bloc?
And that's not going to happen. I mean, that may happen eventually, but because of the need for urgency, I mean, to get a proper coalition together, which included the left, would take weeks of negotiation. He doesn't have that time. So this is going to be probably another short-term and interim prime minister. And Barnier lasted 3 months. The next one might be even shorter. There are names who are out there, a very close ally and friend of Macron. Macron is the present defense minister, Sébastien Lecornu. very veteran, long-standing centrist politician Francois Bayrou are being mentioned, as well as other people. I really wouldn't be sure it would be either of those two. It might be someone pulled out of right field or left field or centre field by Macron, but I think whoever is appointed is going to be appointed just to fill the gap and get the country over this immediate problem of getting some kind of budget agreed, even if it's a rolled over 2024 budget, to stop any possibility of government having to close down, and then go into the new year and try and get a proper 2025 budget agreed. But as you suggested, there's no obvious way you can do that. You have this Parliament split into three mutually detesting blocks. You have the left and the far right, who detest each other more than they detest the centre, possibly voting together against the centre today. They're possibly likely to do that, whatever budget is put before them. And they both the leaders of the hard left, certainly, and the far right, seem to want to use this crisis to spin out the crisis to try and bring pressure on Macron to remove himself from the scene, resign, and have an early presidential election. Next one was due in 2027. I don't think Macron's likely to do that either. So I suspect we're into a long series of crises of this kind, which may continue well into next year.
But isn't the most likely outcome here that Macron appoints a new prime minister who is then immediately voted down in the same way that it took 3 months to vote Barnier down?
Well, not immediately, because neither the hard left and the right, the far right, may be destructive, but they don't want to have to tell their constituents that they're the people who are responsible for the police not being paid or medical system having to come to a halt because there's no budget. I mean, they know that they have to do something now in the next 2 or 3 weeks to stop that happening. So there will be a kind of truce now where everyone takes stock, and that will happen. So whoever's the new prime minister will have a little time before there may be censures put against them, but I don't think both far right and left will combine to vote for this censure motion as they did tonight for a little time. I mean, they will give whoever it is time maybe to propose a new budget, an amended version of the rejected budget, and then you may get a censure. But that, the Parliament has 70 days to debate that budget once it's proposed, probably sometime in the new year, maybe even this month. So I don't think we'll probably hit another crisis of this kind until late February, early March.
How much has President Macron himself been weakened by this crisis?
Well, it's a difficult one to answer that. You could argue that he might be quite sort of happy with what's happened because he has been for the margins. While Barnier was prime minister, Macron was essentially in cohabitation as Chirac and Mitterrand were before, where there was a government run by someone they couldn't control. It's the same. Barnier has been running the show in domestic politics for the last 3 months. Macron has not even been pleased with some of his choices. Macron still has the constitutional right to be pretty well the top person on foreign, defence, European policy, but on all domestic policy, including this budget, he's been pushed to the sidelines. He hardly spoke at the weekly cabinet meetings, although he presided over them. Now he's back in the centre of attention, but as I was saying before, at a point where there is enormous pressure building up to try and force him out of office, which I don't think is going to happen. I don't think he'll do that. But he's been weakened for a while. He was weakened by the failure to get a majority in the Parliament after he was re-elected only 2 or 3 years ago. When was it? 2022, just over 2 years ago. Failed to get a majority in Parliament, and all the problems that have arisen since then stem from that fact. And then he called an early election in June and July, knowing probably he couldn't win that, but hoping to clear the situation, also knowing that his government was likely to be brought down if he didn't. And that ended up with this extraordinarily divided Parliament, not only divided but split into 11 groups, but into these 3 big blocks that refuse to agree on anything. And it's difficult to see how that changes. It kind of reflects where France is, as you know well. I mean, democracy is democracy, and it was the French people who voted those blocks into power. And if there's another parliamentary election, which cannot be constitutionally until next summer, if there was to be another election next summer, or more likely in the autumn, and that's almost certain to happen now, I think you may get a very, very similar outcome in the Parliament, and the crisis or the logjam, the impasse will continue.
OK, John, thank you. That's John Litchfield there. Right, Frank is in Sidcup. Let's continue our conversation about the SNP and Labour and benefits. Frank, what would you like to say?
I completely agree with your point before when you said that the cutoff for the taking away winter fuel payment is wrong, and I think they misjudged it badly. But I completely agree to cancel it. I mean, there's going to be a lot more families with young kids going to be freezing this winter than there's going to be pensioners in the 4-bedroom homes. So, yes, the cutoff is wrong, but removing it is definitely not wrong. And for all those rich pensioners complaining that we're taking the winter fuel payments from the poor ones, why don't you go to your energy supplier and say, you know what, I sponsor a poor pensioner who can't afford the winter fuel. I give him the winter fuel payment out of my pocket, because I know there's lots of rich ones that they can easily afford it.
OK, Frank, thank you. We have to go. Thank you very much indeed for that. On cross question at 8, we have the new Labour MP for Milton Keynes North, Chris Curtis, he's a former pollster, Emma Sinclair, the tech entrepreneur, Matt Warman, former Conservative MP and Digital Minister who wants to run for Mayor of Greater Lincolnshire, and Kishan Devani, a political strategist and businessman. The lines are open for cross question right now on 0345 6060 973. Ian in Strathclyde says, wouldn't it be great if Michel Barnier became an LBC presenter, since he'll now have more time on his hands? How about the 7 to 10 p.m. slot weekdays? This is the loyalty of some of my listeners. Ian, I'm afraid you're going to be disappointed, not least because Michel Barnier's English is, I would say, good though it is, not quite up to it.
Iain Dale. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
7:47. Cross question is coming up in around 13 minutes' time. Get your questions in now on 0345 6060 973. But first, let's talk about a new book which tells the story of this year's general election. 5 months on from polling day, with the government already launching its big reset this week, it's easy to forget what happened back in the summer and how it led to such a convincing victory for Labour. The book is called Landslide, the inside story of the 2024 election, and it's written by the political journalist Rachel Wearmouth and Tim Ross. And we can hear from Tim right now. He had also previously written a book about the 2017 election, which of course ended up with a hung parliament. I asked him what was different about this year's election to that one.
There was a complete turnaround, really, in the way that Labour had sort of approached the election, and particularly in the way that they had managed to transform themselves. If you think back to 2017, it was a crushing defeat for Corbyn and for his brand of politics. Labour sank to their worst result since about the 1930s, I think. And when Starmer took over, it was a dramatic mountain he had to climb. And the first year was bad. It didn't really work in the first year. It was dominated by the pandemic. He couldn't really get much of an impact with the public because everyone was talking about COVID. And the results kept getting worse and worse. They lost Hartlepool, a seat they should never have lost. And at that point, really, Starmer and his team had to take a long, hard look at themselves and work out how on earth they could possibly claw things back. And it was a hard road. They needed to rip everything up, stop playing Mr. Nice Guy with the hard left, for one thing. And so, in overall terms, that transformation was the most dramatic thing. The Conservatives fell to bits, obviously, and we all know exactly what happened there. But the transformation really in Labour's brand, I think, is the most dramatic thing.
You called the book Landslide, and obviously from a seat point of view, it was a landslide. But I described it the other day as a loveless landslide, because if you look at the share of the vote, I mean, it wasn't a landslide at all, was it?
No, and this is one of the most interesting factors about the election, really. As you point out, Labour won 63% of the seats in the House of Commons with only 34% of the vote or something, and it was a very, very disproportionate result. And this is one of the things that I think is going to be argued about for a while. When you think about, when we were talking to Rachel Wearmouth and I, my co-author, when we were talking to Labour sources in the weeks and months after the result, they really didn't see the issue. They just thought, hey guys, we played by the rules. We scored the most goals and we won fair and square. And on one level, that's completely true. They did play within the rules that were facing them, and they absolutely delivered an incredible result. But that low vote share is dogging them, and it's haunting them now. And you've seen that, I think, with this petition calling for an election. There is a question mark over their mandate.
And Keir Starmer actually almost acknowledged that, didn't he? That he said, look, I know a lot of people didn't vote Labour. And it's not something that actually Prime Ministers ever really admit to, but he did. I thought that was quite interesting.
It is interesting. I don't know how deeply he feels it, I think, or even the people around him. I've got a bit of a question mark about that. I think you can say these things, but in the end, you're judged by how you approach it, not actually what you say.
I mean, all elections in the end are about change or stick with nurse for fear of worse. Now, it was always going to be difficult for Rishi Sunak to sell the stick with nurse thing. But the fact that he called the election so early, I mean, everyone now says with hindsight, what a stupid decision that was. And I genuinely think it was, because he didn't carry his cabinet with him. The Conservative Party thought he'd lost leave of his senses. Could it have been different had he waited, do you think?
I'm not sure. And certainly his view at the time, and people like Oliver Dowden, who was around him and advising him, was that you might as well bring the fight on because nothing was working. And it's definitely true that the Tories at that point had tried pretty much everything they could. They tried like massive tax cuts and big NI cuts and things. It didn't work. No one was really listening. No one really gave them much of a hearing or much of a chance. And I think Sunak, one of the things that comes across in lots of the interviews we've done with people is that he could be quite impatient. And I think he sort of had enough of trying that route and just wanted to bring the fight on because it would get people focused on what he was saying. But also he was pretty cross with the fact that Labour weren't being held to account, and he thought that actually it might bring some focus on and some scrutiny on to Starmer as well.
One of the things that hasn't had enough commentary, I don't think, is the fact that he went to see the King to call the election before he'd even told his cabinet.
Yep.
Now, that, as far as I know, is completely unprecedented. And there were quite a lot of Conservative cabinet ministers who were furious about that. Did they vent their spleen to you?
Yes, I'm afraid they did. And it was one of those, you have to picture the scene inside Number 10 on that afternoon of the 22nd of May when there'd been a lot of speculation all morning that this was going to happen. Sunak called in a small group of ministers for a pre-meeting, including people like David Cameron and Michael Gove. Kemi Badenoch was there, and Grant Shapps was there, and he told them all that he'd just been off to see the King, and the King had approved this request to dissolve Parliament. Everyone else sort of was saying, well done, PM, fortune favours the brave, it's a big, bold move. Bring on the fight. Grant Shapps was noticeably really quite cross about this, and he was the only one apparently to speak up, according to our sources, and said, "I really wish you hadn't done that, Prime Minister." And then later on, when it came to the full cabinet, the faces of several people around the table when he told the full cabinet later were ghostly. They'd all the blood drained from their faces, and some of them actually afterwards were in tears because they just knew that their careers were basically going down the drain at that point. And then, of course, the extraordinary scene of him wandering out into the rain to tell the country what he decided unfolded. But again, this again comes back to Sunak's character, because we found out that was his call. He was upstairs. He was upstairs in his study talking to some of his close aides about whether to go out into the rain or not. Liam Booth-Smith, who was his chief of staff, wandered down into the Number 10 back garden, held his hands out, looked up at the heavens, confirmed it was in fact raining and it wasn't stopping, and went back up, and they all had a chat. And Sunak said, "Well, I want to do it out the front. Let's crack on." And the rest was rather soggy history.
And it never really got much better than that. There was no point in the campaign where I think any of us thought that it was going to be anything other than a massive Labour win. Although, I thought they would be getting a much higher vote share than they did.
It had that air of inevitability about it, and things kept going wrong. And you look at the D-Day fiasco as well, and just how they managed to get that so badly wrong. And certainly when, for example, Nigel Farage announced he was standing, that was a huge moment, because he'd initially ruled it out.
I have this theory, I don't know whether you cover this in the book, that the Labour landslide was entirely down to Piers Morgan. And the reason being that he was on Question Time with Nigel Farage and goaded him throughout the whole programme about him being a wimp for not standing. And Farage clearly had enough of it, and then 2 days later announced that he was going to stand. And that galvanised the reform vote in a way that nothing else could have done. And therefore, in virtually every constituency, reform got 6, 7, 8, 9, 10,000 votes, and that deprived the Tory MP of the seat. Had Farage not stood, it wouldn't have been a landslide, in my view.
Might have been a different result. I think certainly the impact of that decision from Farage was enormous.
So well done, Piers.
Well done, Piers. I'm sure you should get. I'm sure Piers would be very, very pleased to take the credit for that one. But the scene inside Labour HQ tells a story, right? On that day, I think it was around the 3rd or 4th of June, when Nigel Farage announced he was coming out of retirement to take back control of his party. Everyone stops what they're doing inside Labour headquarters, crowds around a TV, and just complete silence descends as they watch Farage announce. And when he says that he's standing, people are fist bumping each other. There's a huge grin on Morgan McSweeney's face, who was running the Labour campaign, of course, at the time, and is now Starmer's chief of staff. They just knew what a big deal it was, and that they basically won it at that point.
There's now a great counterfactual, of course, a future counterfactual, that the next election takes place in 2028 or 2029, and Labour haven't delivered on many of their promises. The electorate hates Labour by that point. The Conservatives have ditched Kemi Badenoch. They've ditched Robert Jenrick, who succeeds her, and they're flailing around for somebody new. And Nigel Farage then, of course, could capitalise on this in a way that only Nigel Farage could. And he becomes Prime Minister of a minority government, because I don't think there's any way that Reform could ever win a majority. But you can kind of see that, the possibility. I still think it's like a 10 or 20%, but I'm beginning to think it could happen. Because, I mean, if they've got things up so badly in 4 months, think how well they could do in 4 years. It would take all the stars to align, but you can see it happening.
It's not negligible, and my current job at Politico is looking at European politics more broadly, and also US politics. I was in DC for the Trump comeback election result, and that was a huge moment that lots of people didn't think would ever come to pass. The unlikely is now much more likely than it ever has been, I think, in political terms. And one thing we do conclude at the end of the book is that landslide is an appropriate title because the ground is still very unstable. And that election victory isn't as solid as it might appear, really, for Labour. And certainly populism and hard-right populism at that is very much in the ascendancy in many countries, including most recently we've seen in the Romanian election, which is an extraordinary story. A guy comes from absolutely nowhere, polling completely missed him, and now he's the front runner to become president of a very important strategic country on the edge of Europe. So, yeah, I wouldn't rule it out. I think that our system is tricky because of the first past the post point, but that can be overstated.
That's the political journalist Tim Ross, and his new book, co-written with the Daily Mirror's Rachel Wilmoth, is called Landslide, the Inside Story of the 2024 election. It's published last week.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening and welcome to Wednesday's Cross Question. I'm Iain Dale. On the panel with me, next to me on my left, is Emma Sinclair, tech entrepreneur. She's Chief Executive of Enterprise Alumni. Matt Warman is next to her, former Conservative MP and Digital Minister. He wants to be the party's candidate for the Greater Lincolnshire mayoral election. To my right, Chris Curtis, the Labour MP for Milton Keynes North. He's a former pollster, but don't hold that against him. And Kishan Devani is a political strategist and businessman. They're here to answer your questions. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. You can WhatsApp us on that number. You can text 84850 or say, Alexa, send a comment to LBC. And of course, you can watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, let's start off with a text question from Jonathan in Horsham. Is it time to start pumping lots of cash into our armed forces? Now, the Veterans Minister, Colonel Alistair Cairns, who's a former officer in the Royal Marines, has warned today that if the British Army had to fight in a war of a similar scale to the conflict in Ukraine, it would be destroyed in 6 months to a year. The British Army is currently at its smallest size since the Napoleonic era, with only 72,510 full-time soldiers in it. Chris Curtis, let's come to you. Now, he is a member of the government. He's in the Ministry of Defence. I would say it's fairly, in Sir Humphrey's terms, courageous for him to speak out like this, isn't it?
Well, I think what he's trying to draw attention to, and not unfairly, is that we live in an increasingly unstable world. And in an increasingly unstable world, we're going to have to care a lot more about our defence. We've made that commitment to try and get to 2.5% of GDP being spent on defence as soon as possible. Obviously, we've got a lot of competing priorities at the moment and a lot of difficult decisions that we're having to make. We can't do everything that we want to do, but there is the commitment to try and get there as soon as we can, because in an increasingly unstable world, we need to make sure that we, the most important government.
But you're not willing to commit to a date, unlike the Conservatives.
We'll get there as soon as we can, but there's lots of competing priorities at the moment, and the Conservatives, like we saw in the manifesto, can say what they like, but they never end up reaching any of the targets they set. We don't want to set a target given those competing priorities until we can commit to it, but we're aiming to get there as soon as possible.
Is it really wise for a defence minister to say it in such stark terms that essentially to anybody that wanted to invade us, well, I mean, would be finished within 6 months? It's surely not the message that the government should be projecting.
I don't think that was quite what he meant. But the point he was trying to make.
What did he mean?
The point he was trying to make was, in an increasingly unstable world, it is incredibly important that we prioritise our armed forces and our defence services, and we're living in an increasingly unstable world.
Matt Warman, this is the Conservative Party's fault, isn't it? How could it be that the party of strong defence gets to a point where our armed forces are at such a ridiculously low level?
Well, I think if you look at the work that Ben Wallace did over his time as Defence Secretary, you saw huge investment going into defence, getting to a point that is higher than it had been for a very long time, and crucially setting out that roadmap of when will you get to the levels that supply, as Chris says, the kind of defence that you need in what is an increasingly unstable world. So I don't think anyone in the defence establishment would question the commitment of someone like Ben Wallace to get to the armed forces that we need, and also to tackle the increasing cyber threat that we face, because that's where Russia is increasingly fighting as we speak. But I think it is absolutely on the government. Fair enough, they can criticise the previous regime as much as they like. It is a fact that Labour is in power. Labour has got a Prime Minister that could set a date, could say this is our priority. Not doing so is why you have your own ministers sometimes speaking out and saying we need to get there, because national security is the most important responsibility of government.
Which many people think your government abdicated its responsibility on. I mean, with the army at its lowest level since the Napoleonic Wars, I mean, there's only one party responsible for that, and that's yours.
I think it's a fair criticism to say, look at some of those numbers. On the other hand, look at the investment in the aircraft carriers, look at the investment in cyber defence as well, look at what the Conservative government
the aircraft carriers that don't actually work.
Well, no. Look at the commitment that the Conservative Party made to that future investment. I think, if I'm honest, this is one of those areas where, do I wish we were able to do more? Do I wish we were starting from a different place? Yes, I do, but that doesn't invalidate the fact that huge amounts of money, unprecedented amounts of money, went in over recent years, and that is because we saw what happened in Ukraine and elsewhere. But why have successive Conservative Defence Secretaries, starting off with Liam Fox, then with Philip Hammond, and then with Gavin Williamson, and I can't remember the last few, but going up to Ben Wallace, every single one of them has presided over a cut in the army. And we've seen in the war in Ukraine
that infantry is still going to be important in any future war.
So I think we can have, I'm absolutely happy to have a conversation about the balance of where is your investment going, whether it's into the army, whether it's into drones, whether it's into cyber, whether it's into aircraft carriers. I think what you saw, particularly under Ben Wallace, under ministers like Johnny Mercer, was an understanding that you need to look holistically at our defence. And yes, you can talk about the numbers in the army or whatever, but you have to have a much more rounded perspective, particularly looking at things like cyber. And you do have to, I think, accept, as Labour does but won't put its money where its mouth is, that you've got a target, you have to get there, you have to have a date, you have to have a plan. And
it's an arbitrary target, isn't it? To say, well, I mean, in your manifesto, you had 2.5% by 2030. Now, I believe it'll actually have to be nearer 4 or 5% by that time. But nobody's really willing to have this debate at the moment.
Well, this isn't arbitrary, is it?
Just two very points on that. We have put 2.9 billion more into our defence already, and in spring when we set out the spending review, we are going to be setting out that roadmap to 2.5%. So while we can't do it now, we are going to be setting out that roadmap.
But why 2.5%? Because since that commitment was made, a lot of things have changed.
Well, look,
for the better.
We need to get to 2.5% as soon as possible, and obviously keeping our country safe and defending it is the most important task of this government. In the coming years, in an increasingly unstable world, we will constantly keep that number under review, but the number that we're aiming for, and we're going to be setting out that how we're going to get there is in spring, is to get to 2.5%.
Yeah, no, I think touching on what Chris and what both Matt and Chris both said about the world being completely unstable now. If you're looking at various nations in the world today, in certain countries this type of debate isn't going on either. I mean, it's just armies are funded. So for the last 14 years, we have been let down in the funding of the army. It's undeniable. But what happens now, because all of these types of comments, they can lead to instability in the markets. It can be all sorts of things. I mean, coming from a business perspective, actually, you find that having a strong army secures your borders. If you look at around Africa, for example's sake, right now, all the presidents, the prime ministers around Africa, their first goal is to secure their nations because that allows the economy to grow. We're obviously not in that situation. However, the notion of having secure borders, having a secure nation, really does affect the financial markets. It really does affect the world that we live in the everyday lives that we live in. So fundamentally, I think the minister raises a very important point that in a world where we are increasingly insecure, we do need to start funding our army more. But of course, 14 years of the previous government, things are not going to happen overnight. A Labour government cannot change things overnight. It's going to take time. And I think, I believe that the electorate do understand that and will ride out the course.
Emma.
I've got to tell you, the pace of government feels so slow to a businesswoman like me. I understand that there are rules and processes and papers. I'm not a politico, I run a business. But from the outside, the pace sounds terrifying. And that comment from the minister doesn't exactly portray strength to the outside world, which is generally, I think, a message that you want to make yourself a worthy adversary. I know that we've come out of a long period of peace, so no doubt that's a little bit, that's why things are slightly diminished. I have two things to say from my world. First of all, is the right talent going into the army? So it's all well and good to allocate budget, but are people leaving school and going into the army? Are the right tech, IT, cyber leaders going into the army, or are they going into very well-paid private sector jobs? So that's the first thing that causes me concern. The second thing is, in any business, when you have a flow of people that you require at times, like seasonal labour at Christmas, or the Royal Air Force needs more pilots during time of war but needs less in times of peace, how do you secure yourself effectively a reserve or a contingent army? That feels like something that a business would do, and the contingent army labour force feels like something we should be bulking up. I happen to know about this because my day job is running alumni networks, and we run the alumni network for the Royal Air Force, who right now want to get people back. The army need to do the same. So I think it's, first of all, is the right talent available regardless of any budget anyone finds by the time we eventually get round to it? And second of all, how do we get people back that know how to do all of this and have had experience in the 80s and 90s and 2000s in wars and on the front line? That seems like a faster way to get people up to speed.
Matt, you're the only one on the panel who's been a minister. Was it a source of frustration for you, what Emma just described, the fact that the machinery of government can be incredibly slow? You pull a lever, and in business you would expect something to happen the next day. In government, it can take months, if not years.
Yes, and I think it is absolutely right that government could and should be faster and more agile. When I was, for instance, building out the broadband policy, you're painfully aware of people who are sort of their businesses, their children's education, all that stuff is suffering day by day without that connectivity. On the other hand, we've seen from the COVID response that government can move incredibly quickly. We've also seen in the course of the COVID response that there are costs to taking away some of those checks and balances. So for me, what does the best look like? It looks like a lot faster than we go now, but it doesn't look like we immediately can turn on a sixpence because those checks and balances are important. They safeguard public money and they safeguard good decision making. I think if we look at what artificial intelligence could do for the public services, if we look at how we could be more efficient more generally, there are so many opportunities there that government has a duty to seize. And I'd really like to see Labour lay out a plan for this stuff. I'd really like to see this is how we're going to make the public sector more efficient, more nimble, because we hear a lot about how urgent it is to fix the problems. We don't hear a lot about what the plan is to do so.
I recall a comment that the Duke of Wellington made when he first became Prime Minister, because obviously he'd had this glittering military career, used to getting his own way, and he became Prime Minister. And he said, and you know, these cheeky cabinet ministers, they won't do what I tell them. and I think you can apply that in a way, and I think that maybe you'd agree with this, Chris, that part of the teething problems of the last few months have been because ministers go into new departments, they know what they want to do, but haven't quite worked out how to use the machinery of government to get them to where they want to be. Is that a fair criticism?
And you're never your best at your job on day one, but I think we've got a lot done in these first 4 months. We don't talk about it very much because it's all easy to focus on.
You've put taxes up, you've slashed winter fuel allowances, you've got a lot done, it's true.
We've passed the biggest package of workers' rights in a generation. We've banned water company bosses from taking bonuses until they get sewage out of our rivers. We're passing renters' rights reform, which is going to give more protection to private renters.
Let's not have the whole list.
That's a completely fair point. But the point is, it is quite a long list, so I don't think it's fair to say.
That's why I stopped you.
No, legitimately so. But I don't think it's fair to say that we haven't got on. Okay. We're doing lots of things on the job.
Let's just introduce a follow-up question on this. Jonathan Indalus says, will the Conservatives ever be forgiven for the damage done to our military, borders, police, etc.? I don't think they ever can be forgiven, and I say that as a former Conservative Party member. Kishan, you probably have a little bit of sympathy with that, given that you used to be a Conservative.
Yeah, and I think that
and a Liberal Democrat.
Yeah, I knew you'd say this, Ian.
Well, it's true.
I am exactly where I was politically. I think everyone else around me has changed, and you know, it's. I always say that if you're in a situation where Boris Johnson's leading the Tory party and Jeremy Corbyn's leading the Labour Party, you're in a big pickle politically. Where do you go? So that's where I was at the time, to be honest with you. Anyway, I have a new home in the Labour Party now. So fundamentally, I think that very, very resonates with me. It doesn't just resonate in terms of the defence sector. It's probably across the border in all sectors, actually, where there's been, you know, serious decimation of public services, things that actually, you know, pretty unconservative. You know, all of this type of stuff, even to have this question, imagine having this question during the time of Margaret Thatcher or something, it wouldn't be happening, you know. This is quite...
Well, people accused her of decimating public services.
Well, I'm talking about the defence in particular, this particular question.
Well, there were defence cuts under the Conservative. You look at what was planned before the Falklands War, and some people think that was why the Argentinians invaded, because they could see these cuts coming.
Yeah, but for some of these, you know, for some of these people, they can actually see that there is a real shifting from conservative what they feel are conservative values. And for me personally, I could see how they were decimating small and medium-sized businesses via Brexit. I know we don't sit on the same argument on Brexit, Ian, but the reality is that, you know, Brexit has affected businesses, small and medium-sized.
And Labour's going to fix it.
And how do you think introducing a £2,500 tax on every single employee will help small businesses?
Well, every single employee.
Well, it virtually is, because it's anything that employs over 5 people.
50% of businesses in this country will pay the same or less national insurance
if they employ
contributions.
4 people or fewer.
No, that's not true.
It is true.
No. It's increasing that, but actually that plays up through the system like raising any threshold. So even businesses like larger.
So you think it's good for business, do you?
Well, I don't want to be raising taxes on anybody. It's not what I came into politics to do. Unfortunately, I've got a broken NHS and I've got a £22 billion black hole to close. I mean, you show me a magic money tree in order to solve that problem, and I'll use that magic money tree instead, but I haven't found one yet.
Emma.
Yeah, well, a number of things. First of all, one of my major concerns is that we have people leading departments in the government who have no experience. Now, I understand if you're new to a job or you win an election, then you're never going to have been a minister before. That's understandable. But we talk about speed or pace or fixing things or anything else at all. And we've got, for example, with respect to business minister that's out, I think has a year's work. He did a year at Addleshaw Goddard law firm. That's not experience about business. So we talk about agility, getting things done, or understanding the impact on business. And no doubt, evidently, we've not met before. Chris, lots of experience about pollsters and polling, which I have none of, if I maybe just finish. But, for example, definitely no experience, as best I can tell, unless you tell me otherwise, of running a business. And so you need to have people who have experience to talk to people, and you need to have people who have experience to then implement the changes. And my concern, when I look across the government, Rachel Reeves, number 2, Darren Jones, a wonderful person who, in fact, I was sitting next to last time I was here. Is he equipped to be at the Treasury and to implement everything that everyone's talking about? Of course not. So I find it all very concerning and very worrying, because we have a lack, we have a destabilised time. We have questions being asked, whether it's about the military, whether it's about business, whether it's about national insurance, and we don't really have anybody who can rail these things in and fix them. In fact, as best I can see, things are falling apart very quickly for the government, very, very fast.
A response on that?
I think that's particularly unfair. And just on this experience point, I mean, I worked in a market research company. I think you were an early investor or supporter of that company. That revolutionised using technology, which is exactly what we need to do in government. Using technology completely revolutionised the sector and made the UK one of the world leaders in that sector. And it was brilliant company, fantastic to be part of a business and supporting that. So I've seen firsthand how technology completely revolutionised the sector, and I'm really keen to see to support and work with the government in making sure that we can do that right across government sectors as well, because we need technology to be working more efficiently.
That's a great point, right? That's absolutely brilliant. We definitely need technology, but obviously there are people who do that all day, every day, who can skip the queue and get things done faster. And my concern is the wild lack of experience in those areas.
And we absolutely need to be using people from right across the country doing so, and we're doing a lot of that. But I think there's more experience in this Parliamentary Labour Party than we've seen in most parties.
But it is true that there is only one member of the Cabinet that's ever run any semblance of a business, isn't it? Iain Murray, the Scottish Secretary. Nobody else has. And I mean, I've never thought that every cabinet minister should necessarily go into the job. You don't have to have a teacher to be a good education secretary, for example. But it surely is a little bit concerning, even to you, Chris, that there is that lack of experience in the cabinet, or lack of understanding.
There's a massive amount of understanding of businesses. And look,
as a lawyer who's a number 2 at number 11.
We've said we're going to support.
I'm not sure you picked the best target there, because he is actually quite good, Darren.
I love it. He's a very good friend of mine. But I mean, I don't think that
the last time he was sat in your position there, he actually said, in answer to a question, "I don't know." And you should have seen the comments that came in, and they were all saying, how refreshing that a politician comes on your programme and admits he doesn't know.
I adore him. I don't necessarily think he's the right number 2.
Have you ever been invited to any number 10 round tables with business people? Because that's they do a lot of that engagement.
Yes, loads of that. And at times I have to say, once you get quite far along in your career and you've been on task forces and round tables, it's wonderful to be at the table. If there's something you need to change, fantastic. Be called up to the table. It's great to have access, but I've got a job to do.
Right. Matt, brief word on this follow-up question.
So I think on the one hand, when you've been in power for 14 years, it is a long road back to earn the right to be heard. And I think the approach that Kemi Badenoch is taking to try and say we've got to analyse what we could and should have done better, and we've got to develop the policies that are credible in the eyes of the public, I think acknowledges how long that road is.
Okay. Right, we have to leave it there for this. We've got some really good questions coming up.
Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
23 minutes past 8. Chris Curtis is here, Labour MP for Milton Keynes North. How have you found the change from being a pollster to an MP? I mean, because it's literally one day you're one thing, the next day you're something else.
Yeah, I mean, it's very sudden, and obviously you start being an MP, I'm sure you remember this as well, and you just turn up and you've got to set up an office and the emails start rolling in. But I mean, it's fantastic privilege of a lifetime. I get to spend more time with you these days. It's brilliant. No regrets at all, no.
OK. Kishan Durrani is here, political strategist and businessman. Matt Warman, former Conservative MP, who, Matt, you've put yourself forward to be the Conservative candidate for the Greater Lincolnshire mayoral election. I'm trying to imagine you as a mayor. Why do you want to be a mayor? Why wouldn't you want to go back into Parliament?
So I think the two things I would say is I've spent 9 years as a Lincolnshire MP, someone who's known the area for a very long time, and I've seen how Andy Burnham, Andy Street, Sadiq Khan are able to be the sort of big, loud, proud voice for their areas, Ben Houchin in the Tees Valley, making a real difference. And for me, politics is about making a difference. I can point to lots of things that I was really proud to be able to achieve in the time I was the MP for Boston and Skegness. I think if you want to make that difference, mayors have got a unique opportunity, whether that is in infrastructure, whether that's in attracting investment, whether that is in demonstrating why conservatism works in government. I think there are lots of reasons to look at what regional mayors are able to achieve.
What is Greater Lincolnshire, apart from Lincolnshire?
So Greater Lincolnshire is Lincolnshire County Council and then North and North East Lincolnshire Unitary Authority, so the south bank of the Humber. And that area is a hugely diverse, lots of big agriculture, but also the post-industrial and industrial parts that are on the south of the Humber. Those are putting that together, joining up that economy, I think provides a huge opportunity, and we need to get it right.
Right, let's go to Nathaniel I didn't introduce you, Emma, again, did I? Emma Sinclair. Not former anything, are you?
I've still got a job as
tech entrepreneur.
God, this
and the chief. So I'm digging myself a very deep hole here, aren't I? You can have the first answer to this next question. Right, we're not going to Nathaniel and David, we're going to a text question from Jim. Will renationalising the railways make the trains any better? Fares have just gone up again. Emma.
I don't think so. It feels like going back to the 70s, and there were lovely disco balls and flares. But whilst I'm a spring chicken and didn't live through the 70s as an adult, of course, as you can tell from my skin, I think it's a terrible idea to nationalise the railways. The trouble is that there's no deal with the unions that's been done that's to the benefit of people that use the railways. There was a pay rise. There was no requirement for productivity gain. There's a 4-day week, I think. Sundays are considered overtime. So effectively, trains have to provide a service 7 days a week for people who have to work 4 days a week and Sundays overtime. So I just think that it's very expensive to run a business like that. And I'd rather it was run by the private sector than by the government.
But the private sector hasn't done a very good job of running the railways, has it?
It's not fantastic, but I think it'd be infinitesimally worse if it goes back to kind of the British rail model and public sector.
Isn't railways a perfect example of where privatisation has failed? Because there isn't competition really between the different railway companies. And if they fail in their franchise, they just hand it back to the government, almost no questions asked. I mean, that cannot be justified.
I don't think that is the premise, because if you're a business, then you operate to make money. Businesses fail, the government fail. I think if you think about BT, think about British Rail, think about any of the pre-privatised entities that I've ever spent time reading about. It is a subject I read lots of books about. I'm very boring on holiday. I can think of nothing worse than government being responsible for running our businesses. It just doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. In fact, it goes to the same point I made before, which is why would you put someone from government in charge of running something in the private sector? You need people who do it for a living. Of course, people fail. Of course, things don't go well. And there's obviously been some issues with the railways, but I just cannot understand.
Some issues.
Kishan.
Oh, it's horrendous. I mean, all you've got to do is travel from here to up north, and I had the privilege of doing so during the general election quite a bit, and it's horrendous. I mean, I was shocked at the type of service. I won't mention any company names, but...
Well, feel free. They should be named and shamed.
Well, going to Manchester or Liverpool, there's only one. From Houston, there's only one company you can use. But the reality was, you couldn't find a seat. I mean, I'm not saying that, and the premium cabin that they have... That? Well, my point is this, is that if you go across... I travel a lot from what I do, and I've seen, countries that you wouldn't believe. I mean, India, for example's sake, they're state-run railway services. You should see some of their trains that they've produced over the last 3 or 4 years. They're remarkable. They've changed the whole face of Indian railways now. And you think that's happening in a nation like India, the bullet trains in Japan, for example's sake, right? These are things that we should be aspiring to. If you look at the state of our trains now, if privatisation is going to work, then that really is not seen. You can't see it today in Britain.
But I think that part of the reason why the railways were privatised in the first place was because the rolling stock was ancient, and I think the privatisation of the railways has not been a success. But one area where it has been is the updating of the rolling stock. And on most lines now, and not all, but on most lines, you've actually got up-to-date rolling stock. And you've got on the HS1 trains, the Elizabeth lines just opened. I mean, they are fantastic trains.
No, 100%. And they're getting better, and they have got better. But I think actually, where are we compared to Singapore? Where are we compared to some other nations? Or we're lagging behind. Okay. And I hope that the government will be able to fix this.
But just to correct one thing, the private companies that run a lot of our railways are owned by foreign governments. So this idea that governments can't run organisations that can deliver railways effectively, well, they have been. It's just been French governments and German governments that have been doing so, and I'd much prefer them to be British governments doing so. And actually, we've seen examples of this happen, particularly after COVID. There were lots of examples of the government having to step in because these private companies decided to run off when the going got tough. British government stepped in, and it turns out they ran things better when they did. So we've had an example of this happening under the Tories. It showed that the British government was far more effective at doing it. We've now got, a completely disjointed system where the only people that seem to do well out of it, as far as I can tell, are lawyers who are because we're spending a load of money within the system assigning blame on who's not keeping their contracts. So let's just take that out, bring it back under public control, and focus the money on investing in our railway service, and that one joined up approach.
Do you know how much the government spent on lawyers for the trade unions and doing their pay packets? I mean, everyone spends money on lawyers.
Probably less than Rwanda, right?
No, so, I mean, it makes me feel so nervous.
Union relations are also far better.
It makes me feel union relations are better because you give them lots of money. Yes. But I will ask a question.
Union relations are better under these systems than under.
If I may ask, it just makes me so nervous to hear someone cite Singapore as an example of what works well. There's 5.5 million people that live there. I go there 4 times a year for business. Of course, things work well there. It's a completely different ecosystem.
Because people have invested, right? Governments have invested.
We are not Singapore. I mean, it's just not.
It's a benevolent dictatorship.
Exactly. Singapore, though.
Would you like to import? Because it was an argument from Remainers in Brexit. Well, we don't want Britain to be Singapore on Thames, but you clearly do.
Well, no. I'm saying that if there are good models in running railways, like for India, for example, say India's huge, and you should have a look, do a Google of their new trains. They put out trains to shame.
Singapore.
But Singapore is an authoritarian society. It's not a dictatorship, but quasi. And so is it. Well, India is actually. If you look at aspects of the Indian government, and particularly with their prime minister, you couldn't call that anything but authoritarian.
I don't think that's the case. India's democracy.
I think the interesting thing that worries me in some ways is that under the previous Transport Secretary, Louise Haigh, we had someone who gave a huge pay rise without any commitment to increase productivity to train drivers. Under the current Transport Secretary, we've got someone who in London oversaw some of the worst labour relations that we have seen in years, with strike after strike after strike on the tube. That does not inspire me with confidence. And the reality is that this should be about outcomes for customers, for passengers. And the reason that British Rail was privatised in the first place was because it simply wasn't delivering. You had rolling stock. By the way, the rolling stock companies aren't being nationalised. You had rolling stock that was outdated. You had service that was appalling. That has to be the focus. And you have definitely seen in the course of privatisation significant improvements in the rolling stock. You've seen significant improvements in some aspects of the timetable. There's huge amounts of work to do. But I simply don't see the evidence that an ideological nationalisation is going to deliver what you need.
Well, government was
customers.
doing it. The Conservative government started the process of doing this because they saw just how broken the railways franchising system that was created. We're just making it more joined up.
No, what you saw under the Conservatives was what was in some ways a hybrid system. It was trying to take the best of the private sector to run the services, and it was trying to attract the maximum amount of public investment when there is, as you said, conflicting commitments and conflicting priorities.
I think it's a bit like the NHS. It depends on your own individual experience, doesn't it? Where I mean, I live in the southeast. Southeast trains actually are quite competent, quite efficient. They were a franchise, and then the government took it over. So, I mean, I can't sit here and say the government can't run a railway because I go on trains every day where they are. But, I mean, I suspect it's going to be a mixture in the end.
The incentives in the system just aren't working correctly. We know that, and anybody that's experienced the system knows that there isn't enough of the incentives for the private companies to be doing the right thing.
Well, there's no competition, that's the problem.
And there's no competition.
I mean, you can't have a market without competition.
It's not ideological. It's genuinely not. Massive fan of the free market. We need it. It's great. It doesn't work here.
Massive fan of the free market.
Yeah, of course.
Nationalise the rails.
Yeah, because you can't make a free market work. You've got a limited number of railway tracks in this country. And it hasn't been a free market. Just like Iain says, there's no competition on the railways. So it is not a free market model. It's a franchising model.
Right.
And it hasn't worked. It hasn't increased that competition.
Well, I'm going to be the benevolent dictator on this programme and say we need to go to the news headlines.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Chris Curtis, Emma Sinclair, Matt Warman and Kishan Devani with us answering your calls. Let's go to Nathaniel in Dover. Hi, Nathaniel.
Good evening, Iain. Good evening, panel. So my question is, how concerned should we all be over Elon Musk's intentions to influence British politics?
And I guess what you mean by that is the $100 million that he's rumoured to be promising Reform UK.
Yeah, and also about that, he also vocalised a lot about this petition as well, didn't he? So there's a lot of noises all of a sudden coming from him, which is a bit worrying for me.
Matt Warman, what do you make of this? You're, of course, Digital Minister in Boris Johnson's government, and you've got a long-standing interest in technology. You work for the Daily Telegraph as tech editor. So are you concerned by this, particularly having been defeated by Reform UK in the election? Sorry to remind you.
So thank you for bringing it up. So I think I'd say two things. I'd say, firstly, anyone unduly seeking to influence British politics is a worry. We have laws in place to try and stop that happening. But park that. Let's assume that what we're talking about is a legal way of trying to change the political debate in this country. And I think it underlines simply how much work what I'm going to lazily call mainstream politicians, Labour and the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats, have to do to convince people that those relatively centre-ground ideas are the ones that are going to make the best kind of progress. Because for me, it's really easy to look at reform and say you're providing a commentary on issues that we all acknowledge exist, and you're pretending that there are easy answers. And the reality of those easy answers is that they lead you only to a place where people are even more disillusioned with politics because they are not going to work. You can't do all the things on immigration that Nigel Farage might wish we can do. You can't do all the things on net zero that Richard Tice might wish we can do overnight. So I think we have to continue to be committed to that sensible approach that says politicians have got to win the argument. And I don't want to see the argument won by $100 million worth of advertising. I want to see it won by ideas. And I've got enough faith in the British public to think that they are going to engage with those ideas and see charlatans when they see them.
Well, the Conservative Party accepts donations from billionaires. I'm not sure anyone's ever given that quite that amount of money, but certainly over the years, there are various people that I can think of who've given tens of millions over a period of time.
And I know you're going to mention the unions any second, and Labour, Iain.
I was waiting for Chris until I did that.
So the reality is, you're right, we do have a political system in this country that is funded broadly by donations. I would rather it was, as it somewhat used to be, funded by a broad base of public support of relatively small contributions. But we are in the system that we are in.
Okay. Kishan.
Yeah, no, it petrifies me. Look, I come from the British Indian community, and it petrifies me to think that someone like Nigel Farage could be in a position of power if things like undue influence or this.
Why does it petrify?
Well, it does because, he actually more for my children, because I'm a product of East African immigration from the Ugandan exodus in Idi Amin. I'm pleased I'm not comparing Nigel Farage to Idi Amin at all, but what I'm saying is this conversation about them and us, which has developed over the last, since, I hate to name the word, since the Brexit vote, it has left a lot of my community and a lot of people within the British Asian community a bit uncomfortable. Successful people from business, from all walks of life, from politics, etc., etc. But so I'm sure Nigel is a great guy, and he's a nice man personally. Not met him, but it worries me that someone of that who is very influential, let's not mince our words, Elon Musk has played a part in this US presidential election. And he has no doubt influenced millions of people to vote for Donald Trump. And hats off to him how he done it. I mean, he seems to be a genius when it comes to this. My worry is if he starts to use those types of tactics here, because we are in a volatile situation electorally, like Matt said, that people can be influenced by various forms of extremism, in my view.
But isn't it up to the Labour government to deliver on its promises? So when the next election comes, Keir Starmer can go to the election and say, look, we made all these promises in 2024. A lot of people thought we couldn't do it, but here, this is what we've done, X, Y, Z, and for the Conservative Party to get its act together and become a proper opposition. And then Reform have got a much more difficult job. But if Labour doesn't deliver, and if the Conservatives don't get their act together, I can see the circumstances where Nigel Farage could make a big breakthrough. I did.
Yeah.
And it wasn't writing an article that I hoped would come true, but I think people tend to write off Nigel Farage at their peril. Chris?
Oh, sorry, I was planning to answer on donations. I wouldn't roll out Nigel Farage at all. I see why he appeals to people, and I particularly see why he appeals to people when, to be blunt, everything's so broken. Public services are broken. People basically haven't had a pay rise for the best part of 2 decades now. And, we talk a lot in this government about delivery and why it's so important that we get economic growth back and everything else. What I don't think we talk enough about is the consequences of failure. Because if we have another 14 years where economic growth is as disastrous as the last 14 years, I think it's going to be very difficult for us to hold on to the centrist democracy that we both believe in. So it's so important for this government, not just for the benefits of itself, but actually I think for the future of the kind of democracy, centrist democracy that I hold dear, for us to make sure that we deliver on that. And that's what keeps me awake at night, but also gets me into work in the morning.
Emma?
Well, first of all, Kishan, as best I can tell, was a member of the Tory party and a member of the Labour Party, so he might be a member of Reform by the next time you have him on. Anyway, as
he's going the other way. He's going leftwards.
I just wanted to flag that.
I didn't leave any party.
We've heard it all.
Okay, yes.
That's the line to take.
I will say one thing about Elon, which is...
Are you on first name terms?
What can I say? I'm in the tech community. I don't want to embarrass anybody else here. I did see him at breakfast a little while ago in Los Angeles. I must say.
Did you speak to him?
I did.
Did you?
Yes, but he's not a friend of mine. Just so that we're clear. There's absolutely nothing exciting.
Is he as weird as his... I mean, I had an interview with his father recently, which explained a lot, let's put it that way.
All I can tell you is I know that he stays at the Sunset Marquee in Los Angeles quite often, so maybe you should pitch up there at some point. It's a small hotel, but it's lovely. To the point about the donations.
Is that on Sunset Boulevard?
It is.
I think I stayed there.
On the corner of La
only time I've ever been to Los Angeles.
Yes, right by Sunset Plaza. I'll draw you a little map in the break.
Anyway, carry on.
We'll call him Mr. Musk. We'll call him Mr. Musk so that I don't sound too familiar. I don't personally think that it'd be fantastic to go in the direction of the USA. I think it's a little bit tricky to think that highest bidder wins and only the sort of mega wealthy have access. Nothing wrong with donations, but I wrote 2 things down in my red pen, not my black pen, and one was the unions seem to be fine. Labour seems to be fine with heavy donations from the unions. And Chris, I listened to your comments, and time again, the thing that I come back to from some of the things you say and talking about growth or success or the economy is, you're right, it's a great time to be working in the public sector. It's the private sector that most business people I know are really worried about.
If I can just one thing about the obvious appeal of Nigel Farage and of parties from the fringes of the left and right, it is that they are perceived to be straight talking. It's what you see is what you get. And one of the huge problems that we have had, and I'm not pretending that this is a uniquely Labour problem by any means, but the fact that there is the perception that you can't trust a single word that politicians say, and yes, it's a Labour point that they come in and they say they're not going to raise taxes and then they put up national insurance or whatever it might be. I'm sure you can think of Tory examples as well if you want to. But that point of trying to say politics should be about trust, and we are living in a world where people are turning to people with simplistic, straight answers because they don't think that other people are winning the arguments. And that's what we've got to try and get back.
Or capable of delivering.
What you see should be what you get, and delivery is important, and the promises you make are important. And that's what I think. That's why you've got 2 or 3 million people signing a petition about the Labour government. It's because of that distrust and lack of faith. And that's what I'd like. That I want.
But that's because your party lets so many people down, including its own supporters like Kishan. than me.
I want whoever is in government in this country to succeed. That is the commitment. But if you get to power by saying you're going to be different or reap the consequences.
Okay. Right, 15 more minutes to go. We'll get lots of more of your questions to our panel.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
None of you
it's 8:47 on LBC. We have with us Chris Curtis, MP, Emma Sinclair, Matt Warman and Kishan Devani. Let's go to Mark in Kilburn, who says, with reference to recent polls showing an increase in support for the Reform UK party, should the left of centre parties work closer together in the run-up to the next election in order to avoid splitting the vote in key seats? Now, last night, the Reform leader was named the Spectator magazine's Newcomer of the Year at its Parliamentarian of the Year Awards. In his speech, he vowed that there will be hundreds of newcomer Reform MPs before long. Chris Curtis.
No, I don't think we should work with other parties to beat Reform. I think it's up to voters to decide who they're going to vote for, and we put our best foot forward. We make the best case. This government's going to deliver for working people across the country, and that's how we beat Reform, not jumping into bed with those lot who messed it all up in the first place.
Kishan?
Yeah, I agree with Chris. I mean, we just, we've got to combat this, and I don't think working with political parties, cross parties, is necessarily the idea.
Emma?
I'm not especially political. I'm just interested in rational, pragmatic approach to infrastructure, growth. So currently Labour do not resonate with me. In terms of reform, though, a lot of... not really, no. But Tony Blair was more appealing than others, for sure. But I will say that a lot of people I know who run businesses voted Reform as a protest vote against the Tory party. So I don't know whether there are going to be hundreds of new little reformers, or whatever the phrase was, running around Parliament in the near future. But I do hope that there are more business people and more pragmatic people with life experience running around in the Houses of Commons.
Matt?
Look, I don't think it's right to suggest that we should have sort of some left-wing alliance against the Conservative Party or Reform or whoever. I think Chris is right to say you should make your own case. But I do think when you see people saying they're going to vote for Reform, it is very often a sign of immense frustration at where we've ended up for a whole host of reasons.
Tory government.
And I think you've seen some of the Reform votes go up since Labour, in the polls since Labour have taken power. So I think that tells you something about where people are at, and it's not where this Labour government is at.
But there's a poll out today that shows the Conservatives on 29% and Reform on 20%. Well, 49% of the vote, that could get the Conservative Party back into government. And there are many people in the Conservative Party who think that there needs to be an accommodation somehow with Reform. Nigel Farage, I think, has kind of hinted at that. But presumably, having been beaten by Reform, you wouldn't want that to happen.
So I think we should win the argument. I think the lines that both Kemi Badenoch and Rob Jenrick used in the Coastal Leadership campaign, it is the job of the Tory party to make Reform redundant. It is not our job to assimilate them. And I think we have to win those arguments, because the thing that worries me about Reform, as I said a minute ago, is these are not tangible solutions that will make a difference. I get the frustration, of course I do, but if there were easy answers to complex problems, then over the last 14 years the Conservatives would have delivered them. Over the previous 13 years the Labour Party would have delivered them. The reality is that complex problems demand complex thought and complex approaches, and that's what grown-up politics means.
Right, let's go to Chris in Stubbington. Hello, Chris.
Hello, Ian. Is it time for Whitehall civil servants to return to the office?
Is it time to return to the office in Whitehall? Well, the Telegraph says its analysis of 13 government departments shows the number of civil servants turning up to the office has fallen by around 5% since the general election, while the private sector is reducing the amount of working time which it allows its employees to spend at home. Emma?
I think it goes to the point I made earlier, which is it's a great time to be working in the public sector. Yes, I can make this very easy in terms of my opinion. Absolutely, people should be going into the office. Things don't get done when people are remote, on Teams, on phone calls all day long. You need people to get together to solve problems. And so I totally think that is an urgent requirement, and people should be together, not apart.
Chris?
My understanding of the evidence is that the point Emma just made, and again, I'm not an expert in this, is not backed up. And actually, there's a hybrid system that is the maximum amount on productivity. Lots of private sector companies offer that. I mean, also, we're talking
say
about...
only office.
No, I do say that. Sorry, that's fair. I do support a hybrid system. I think that's true for the civil service as well. My understanding is the general approach this government's taking, the civil service is taking, is telling people that they should be coming into the office 3 days a week. From my experience working in private business, that was generally the optimum setup as well, and I think that's broadly what we should be aiming for.
Kishan.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, again, I hate to bring in other countries, but sometimes you have to look at good practice. You look at Scandinavian countries, for example's sake, where this model has been going on for some time. It leads to better quality of life. It leads to people having better sort of work-life balance, and actually it does work. I mean, my wife works from home for a for a big fintech company, and she's very productive. In fact, probably more than sometimes some of her colleagues. And so it can work. Yeah. It does work. I think it's a little bit about your own conscience, about your own morality. I get that. I understand that. But actually, to say one size fits all is probably not the right way of operating.
Matt?
I mean, my starting point is I couldn't care less where people work. I care about the outputs. And I think what we've learned over the course of the pandemic and everything thereafter is that working from home all the time is not the most productive version. Some people would say that working from the office all the time is not the most productive version either. What worries me is you are seeing an acceleration back to the office in the private sector, and because they're driven by results. I'm not sure you're seeing that equivalent acceleration in the public sector. And I think if the government is as committed to driving the results that it says it is, then you would expect there to be a correlation. And until we see that, you're going to keep getting what is a slightly frustrating debate about where are people working. We should be talking about them achieving the maximum possible outcomes by doing the best things. Part
of the problem for the government is it's not government ministers that decide who comes into work in their departments. It's the permanent secretary. So, I mean, that's quite an important point to make, I think.
I'm not entirely convinced that the point just made there was true. I actually, from the data I've seen, it's pretty comparable, the amount of working from home across the public sector and the private sector. I mean, it's actually higher in the public sector, but there's lots of public sector jobs where you have to go into your place of work. But where it's in comparable jobs, it is fairly similar numbers. Okay. But I think the other point is the public sector has to compete with the private sector. If we go and set a load of rules, it's going to make them harder to bring people in. Set firm rules from top of government. It's going to make it harder for them to get people in, because in contract negotiations, you sometimes have to go, well, we'll let you work home from a day a week because you've got kids, and that's much better to get in the talent that we need into our civil service, which we've been talking about right across this.
If that's what it does, then great. But we need the evidence that that's what it does, and I don't think that's what's there.
Right, Emily in Shoreditch has an interesting question. 300,000 children in England never go to school. What should be done to get them learning again? Now, a report from the Education Policy Institute has warned just how many ghost children there are now, with around 300,000 5 to 15-year-olds across England hardly ever attending school. The report warns there has been a significant increase in the number of children doing this since before the COVID pandemic. I find this a staggering question, because you think, well, surely local education authorities have a duty to find out what's happened to these children if they're not attending school, but apparently not. Kishan?
Yeah, I mean, that's troubling, but each one of these circumstances, the more you delve into children going to school, and having an education background myself as well, you find that there are a lot of underlying causes, from poverty, from a lack of access. There's lots of family issues. There's lots of underlying causes for these 300,000 children not going to school. Now, that's no excuse as to why this is happening. There shouldn't be 300,000 in Britain in 2024. Should not be the case. But what are we doing as society generally to make sure that that number decreases? Now, that's government, that's families, that's the whole network and the whole schools network that needs to be looking and doing some serious introspection and seeing what we can do to alleviate this, because it's not acceptable in 2024 Britain that we have that scenario. But if you go in deep and dig, a lot of it's to do with their situations, these children's situations, and where they find themselves in. So,
Emma?
I have absolutely no professional experience in this, but a couple of things come to mind. Assuming this is not children who can't find a school to go to, so special needs, or haven't been able to access education, therefore are not turning up. On the one hand, my immediate first thought is there's all kinds of technical solutions and AI that can teach children education from wherever they are and whatever tools they use. However, as a governor of a primary school in a very deprived area for many years. I do remember and meeting tons of children whose parents don't speak English and were often out of school because their parents needed help filling in forms and getting the electricity back on and trying to apply for a job. So I don't know what percentage of children that is. It's terribly sad. I'm sure there's no one binary answer. And it sounds, I imagine there's an enormous amount, as everyone has said, of social issues which are very unfair and upsetting for those children and something we should all be thinking about.
Some are suggesting that fining parents might be a good idea. Would that achieve anything?
I mean, it doesn't feel like that would help with any of the very many children I can think of that applies to. I mean, I know a lot of children who often don't come and they're not truant. They just are taken out, and when you dig deeper, you can see why. I don't know anything behind those numbers, so my mind immediately, like Kishan, goes to the fact that there's probably some complex social, financial issues that add to that complexity.
Okay.
But if that's not the case, and people are not turning up for the wrong reasons, then definitely take.
Chris.
Yeah, I actually agree with a lot of what you just said there as well, and the fines are in place, and I think they actually do work in some circumstances. But most of these cases where you've got people who are regularly not going into school, that's not the answer. You need more support mechanisms right across our society. And we've lost a lot of those in recent years. A lot of it is to do with special educational needs not being dealt with. You walk around almost anywhere in this country, you knock on a few doors, and it'll be one of the top issues that's raised with you with parents is how hard it is to get that support. We put a bit of extra money into that in the budget, which will be helpful, but there's loads of extra support mechanisms across our country and society that we've lost in recent years, and we do need to build them back up, because this is a devastating consequence of it. That's 300,000 kids who are having their futures and opportunities stolen from them by not being in the classroom, which we know is the best place in order to give them the best start in life.
Right, we have a fun question from Rose in Stoke. Taylor Swift has been named as the most played artist on Spotify this year, as she was also last year. But who do you think is your most played artist over the past 11 months? Matt Warman.
Well, I've got a now 8-year-old, and frankly, I'm just glad to have escaped the era where Frozen is my most played song for, I think it was several years. Actually, I discovered on the same thing that Chapel Rowan is my most played thing. Chapel Rowan, Ian.
That's popular music beat combo you're on.
An individual young lady, Ian.
Okay,
but it turns out that I'm trendier than I thought. It's a terrible accident.
Who would have thought?
I know, but
Emma Sinclair.
Yeah, it's the algorithm.
Yeah. Mine wasn't Frozen, it was Mary Poppins, but we've also recently moved on for that. I just had a look on my Spotify at the top 5 and had a look at which one was the least embarrassing to mention. And the least embarrassing of my top 5, because I do often play it on the way to work, is Dolly Parton 9 to 5, to rev myself up.
And what's the most embarrassing?
We can't talk about.
Come on.
We can't
You'll
talk
sit
about.
there until you tell me, Emma. Go on.
This is hugely humiliating.
You know you want to.
What, you think Vanilla Ice is a problem?
Come on.
Chris.
That's on one of my playlists.
Number one.
Yeah, I've also checked. All of mine are embarrassing, but the original Broadway cast of Hamilton is the one that comes out on top.
Okay,
Same problem with Matt. I said just like with Matt. I had Paw Patrol on my car, my 4-year-old. But no, I like Am I Wrong with Nico. I don't know whether you know it's R&B.
Oh, that sounds like some kind of remix.
2014. It's a little bit of a remix. 2014 actually. So this is going back to.
Are any of you familiar with Fuse ODG?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, here's my new favourite. I downloaded every single song he's ever done. 59 of them.
It's great, isn't it?
Every one a banger.
Yeah.
And he's going to be a guest on our last cross question before Christmas. So I'm so looking forward to that.
Get me back on for that, because that'll be amazing.
You're not going to want to talk about politics and economics. You're just going to want to talk to him.
Exactly.
I feel sorry for
He's on my list as well.
Well, on Wednesday, the 18th of December, you'll be able to hear him live on Cross Question. Thank you all very much indeed.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
Just before we move on to our next subject, I want to read out a text from Matthew who says, quite a lot of hostility towards the unions from Emma Sinclair on tonight's Cross Question. Also from Janet Daly on last night's programme. You should invite representatives of the unions onto the panel to put their side of things. The unions are no less interested in the success of this country. We shouldn't have business interests dictating everything. The clue for Miss Sinclair and Miss Daly is really in the first part of the expression public services, which I think neither of them seem to grasp. Well, I think most trade unions would agree that this programme, of any programme on the British media, gives unions a much more of a say than any other does. We often have union voices on Cross Question, and we will continue to do so. It just so happens that tonight and last night we did not, although Chris Curtis was here putting the union point of view, I guess. Anyway, let's move on from that to a subject which has got quite a lot of traction in the newspapers over the last few days, and it is the annual practice of trying to symbolise that gay people are welcome in football, and that is for footballers to wear rainbow shoelaces. And that practice has been expanded to captains wearing rainbow armbands, and in fact other players in the team wearing rainbow armbands. And also possibly rainbow coloured jackets. I personally haven't seen those, but apparently yesterday Manchester United players were all going to wear rainbow jackets until one of their number, a Muslim player, decided that he did not want to, so none of them did. Now, I take the view that if somebody doesn't want to wear a symbol, then they shouldn't be forced to do it, whether it's to do with supporting LGBT inclusion, whether it's supporting Black Lives Matter. If somebody is, for whatever reason, wholly opposed to it, maybe on religious grounds, then I don't see what is to be gained by forcing them to do so. However, having said that, I think there is a problem in men's football, not in women's football, but in men's football, about gay inclusion. There is no gay out Premier League player. Now, why is that? I think we can all guess at the reasons for that, and we'd probably mostly be right. There's plenty of lesbian women Premier WSL footballers. So why is it fine in the women's game but not the men's game? So I think it is absolutely right for initiatives to be launched by individual football clubs and indeed the Football Association to demonstrate that gay fans are welcome in football, that gay players are welcome in football. But it surely has to be a voluntary thing. Now, Mark Gahey, the Crystal Palace and England international, he's broken his silence after writing a religious message on his Premier League captain's armband. Now, he's a devout Christian, and he was warned by the FA not to repeat his actions after writing "I love Jesus" on his armband in Saturday's 1-1 draw with Newcastle. Now, on Tuesday night, so last night, he ignored this warning as he wrote "Jesus loves you" on his armband as Palace beat Ipswich 1-0. I only say that because Chris, my producer, is a Palace supporter. A poor bloke. Now, Gahey has spoken out for the first time, telling Sky Sports, "I think the message was pretty clear, to be honest. It's a message of love and truth as well, and a message of inclusivity, so it speaks for itself." Now, you can read it like that. If you write "Jesus loves you" on a rainbow armband, you can argue that that message is aimed at gay people themselves. Or you can take it as a sign that he doesn't support gay inclusion, but basically says Jesus loves everyone. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt here. Now, the laws of football allow slogans promoting the game of football. The laws of the game allow slogans promoting the game of football, respect and integrity. But the laws forbid political, religious or personal slogans, statements or images. Breaching this requirement is a strict liability situation, with the laws adding, for any offence the player and or the team will be sanctioned by the competition organiser, National Football Association or by FIFA. Now, the Ipswich skipper, Sam Morsey, who's a Muslim, he refused to wear the rainbow armband on religious grounds. Now, that's odd in some ways, isn't it? Why would you do it on religious grounds? Because, believe it or not, I mean, if Mr. Morsi is listening, there are gay Muslims. And I think maybe they would have appreciated the support of Mr. Morsi. But again, I would stand by his right not to wear it if he really didn't want to. And there have been several other incidences of this nature. Now, I'm quite keen to know what you think of this, whether you think that in some ways this whole issue now is being counterproductive, and the whole issue of inclusivity in football is being damaged by these headlines. Do symbolic gestures like these help tackle discrimination, or are they increasingly counterproductive? 0345 6060 973. Well, Benedict Spence joins me now, writer and political and social commentator. Benedict, very good evening.
Good evening.
How do you think this whole issue has been handled? A, by the footballers themselves, B, by the football authorities, and C, by the media?
I think it is very important to recognise that actually individual expressions and individual demonstrations of faith are important. It is as important to respect somebody's religion as it is important to respect somebody's profession in the belief, for instance, of LGBT rights. And I think that is something that we should accept and tolerate and promote, actually, in a liberal democracy such as ours. The thing that sort of strikes me about all of this is we're talking about this through the prism of being British and British values, and of course, the English Premier League I suppose, perceive it as being a part of that. But it's in reality not. The Premier League is an international competition. It gains a great deal of attention abroad. A huge proportion of its money comes from its popularity abroad. And of course, it is, if you like, the best advertisement for migration to this country, that this is a product, if you like, that provides people from all over the world with an opportunity to make something of themselves and to succeed in this country. When you bring people from across the world, you also have to accept that they will bring their own views, their own values. And this is something that I think for too long we have failed to recognize. When you bring a highly talented footballer from, say, sub-Saharan Africa or Latin America or the Far East, their attitude, their social norms may not be the same as ours. And they're not just competing for the attention, the affection, and the approval of a domestic British audience. Their games, what they do, what they say, is being watched in their home countries. It is being watched around the world. And I think that whilst a lot of us, you and I included, might find it incompatible with the ideas of tolerance for somebody to be opposed to, say, for instance, a pro-LGBT campaign, we have to recognise and respect that the Premier League now transcends borders in that sense, and it transcends a lot of British values. It is an international product, and those who participate it and watch it are international. So we have to accept that there are views from around the world. Now, I do think that we should use this very rare example of soft power that actually works to promote our... Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Benedict, I didn't want to interrupt, but before you get on to your next point, I just want to clear something up, because Mark Gay is from South London. He was born in the Ivory Coast, but he was brought up in South London. Sam Morsy is from the West Midlands. He's got an Egyptian father. So these two, now the other one, the Manchester United footballer...
Nusayr Mazraoui, who is from Morocco.
Yeah, now I think he's a different case, but two of the three that we're talking about are actually brought up in the UK.
But also they are from migrant backgrounds. They've come from around the world their parents brought them here for similar reasons that international footballers might move here as first generation migrants. And again, that's something that we have to recognise. This is one of the the very curious things about changing demographics in the UK is that London is becoming increasingly socially conservative, having been perhaps the socially liberal capital of the UK, partly because of the number of migrant communities that have moved here from places that are very conservative. And again, you have to recognize that. You can't necessarily be intolerant of it just because we dislike it. I think we should. I do think that we should use the Premier League. I'll say it again. It's a rare example of soft power that actually works, actually means something. And I do think that we should use that to promote values that we have in Britain, liberal democracy, tolerance, what have you. But you can't just sort of take a hammer to it, if you like. You can't say to people, well, you can only play here, you can only be accepted here if you accept our rules. I mean, we could try that, but then I don't think it would remain the world's best footballing competition for very long. I think people would, especially on religious grounds, people would say, well, actually, what is more important to me, the money or the faith? And some people would choose the money and the fame, but I suspect rather a lot of people would choose the faith. And at a time when, for instance, the Saudi Arabian Pro League, the UAE League, other leagues, not just in Europe, are competing and are offering comparable wages in many cases to some footballers and are able to tempt very talented footballers away from Europe. If we want this to continue to be the prestige football league in the world, that is something we should take into consideration, that there are other options out there for people.
Benedict, thank you. That's Benedict Spence, writer and political and social commentator. Kakan Qureshi joins me, a Muslim LGBT plus activist who is the founder of Finding a Voice, a support group for LGBT plus people from South Asian backgrounds. Kakan, very good evening to you. What do you make of this row?
Good evening. I just think that as a gay Muslim, for one thing, I do love Jesus and other prophets from the Abrahamic faith and beyond. But I feel that what's been happening here is that the one with the armband, who I love Jesus on the armband, is sabotaging the campaign, which was up until now a very successful campaign, as far as I believe. Part of it is to stamp out homophobia. And the thing with football and football culture and everybody associated with football, it's highly, a very hyper-masculine environment. And as you said at the beginning of this discussion, that, there isn't anybody who's out in that particular community. And the idea of the armbands and rainbow jackets and rainbow laces is to show unity and solidarity in amongst the community, so that, people do feel who are part of the LGBT community, that they do feel welcomed at matches, and they can feel comfortable at these matches. And if they are gay and they're a footballer as well, that at some point, I don't know when, but at some point they can come out and it won't be an issue. But what's happening here is that the footballers in question, the fact that you're saying that the football ground should not be political or religious or anything else like that, has become very religious and political in itself. The fact that they've made a stance, like writing on the armband, and deciding not to wear the laces because of their religious beliefs, that immediately makes it a religious playing field, really. And I think,
but don't they as individuals have the right to self-expression? And if they feel that something which you and I might find weird, that they can't bring themselves to do this, but if they can't, who are we to say they have to?
But the idea of the armbands and the rainbow laces is to show that, I don't know how many decades football has been around, but it's only in recent times that, we're trying to say football can be more inclusive. But if you've got one or two individuals who are standing up for their own personal religious beliefs, and then you said Man United have agreed that all the players should not wear the jacket, then it's appeasing the minority. And in this instance, we're not going to move forward on trying to stamp out homophobia within football. We're just going to continue to perpetuate the myth that it's a toxic environment and that we're going to continue closeting football players. And that's what it is. And especially, I think one of them is a captain, I believe. So he's in a position of power and authority where he could have become more of a better role model to say, I don't necessarily personally agree with it, but I'll carry it through. Even if it's on a superficial level, it's like me, for example. I don't deal with pork or anything, but in the jobs that I've done previously, I would wear gloves and carry out my duty as a support worker at that time to enable other people to feed them and give them what they need. And he could have done the same in football. He could have said, I don't necessarily internally agree with what's being said, but to show solidarity to the LGBT community, I'll wear it. But what he's done is sabotage the armband, and he might as well have put a swastika on a cross or something. Because that's how strongly I feel.
Hang on a second. Writing Jesus loves you on a rainbow armband, you can't equate that with a swastika, seriously.
But what I'm trying to say is that he's sabotaged what should have been, like we say, a subtle symbolic gesture, and he's deliberately provoked a statement on there, because there are some people who are triggered by equating religion and homosexuality or sexual orientation and gender identity. And that, but for people like myself, what he's done is distance himself. And to me, I'm trying to say that there are people of faith and religion within the LGBT community and vice versa. And even though I don't know if he's trying to backtrack on it and say it means I'm being inclusive, there's no need for him to do that.
Now, before I let you go, can I put a question to you that somebody has texted in? Well, it's actually not a question, it's a statement, but I think it's incredibly wrong and offensive, and I'm sure you'll think so as well. Anna says, a gay person cannot be a Muslim. They may say they're Muslim, but they're not.
Well, that's a statement that I've heard many times over the years. I don't agree with it because, we've been here since millennia and we can be whoever we want to be. And just like you've already said, people can go onto the playing field and express their authentic selves. Us, as gay Muslims or Hindus, Sikhs, etc., we're everywhere. We would like to express ourselves in a comfortable, safe environment. But if football and the football premiership continue to do these sort of underhanded gestures, as I would call it, and agree with what they said and said it's their personal choice, we're not going to move forward at this. We're going to have football in another 5, 10, 20 years still remaining in the closet. Yet we know from the grapevine and people in the LGBT community that there are gay footballers out there, but they're not ready to come out because of the backlash from football fans and, for their own personal safety.
Just as there are gay Muslims out there who fear for their safety, which is why they don't come out. Thank you very much indeed, Kakan. That's Kakan Qureshi. He is a Muslim LGBT plus activist who's the founder of Finding a Voice, a support group for LGBT plus people from South Asian backgrounds. We'll come to your calls in a moment. Do symbolic gestures like these help tackle discrimination, or are they increasingly counterproductive? 0345 6060 973 is the number to call.
Leading Britain's conversation. Iain Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
24 minutes past 9. It is quite astonishing. In 2024, people can seriously believe that you can't both be gay and Muslim. There was an Iranian president, was it Ahmadinejad, who swore that there was not a single gay person in Iran. I mean, what a joke. What an absolute joke. And if your religious beliefs blind you to the fact that homosexuality exists in your religion, just as it does, frankly, in every religion and no religion, I don't know what that says about you, because it effectively means that you're blind to the reality that stares you in the face. But, I mean, we can take calls on that if you like, but I also want to obviously take calls on our main subject, which the question I'm asking is, do symbolic gestures like wearing rainbow laces or indeed a rainbow armband, do they help tackle discrimination, or are they increasingly counterproductive? Because I don't think all of the headlines, and I've got a whole raft of them in front of me here, Manchester United ditched LGBTQ plus jackets after Nusa Mazrui refused to wear one. They were all going to wear one, and because one team member decided he wouldn't because of his religious beliefs, none of the others did. Now, whether they were ordered not to, I've got absolutely no idea. I don't think that people should be forced to wear something, whether it's a jacket or an armband or laces, if it is profoundly against their own beliefs. Now, I would take issue with them, and I would like to have a sit down and talk to them about it, because it is a pretty antediluvian view in 2024, particularly in a liberal society like Britain, that somehow being a homosexual is wrong, that people should be ashamed of it, that somehow what they're doing is against the teachings of the Quran or of the Bible or of whatever religious text you like to insert there. I don't understand how people in this day and age, when you're brought up in a liberal education system which teaches you tolerance of people who are different from you, whether it's of a different sexuality, a different religion, a different race, I struggle to comprehend that. And I do worry that these headlines actually are damaging inclusivity in men's football. Now, women's football doesn't seem to have an issue with this at all, in that there are a number of the England women's team who are openly gay. And, I mean, why not? but we still haven't had an openly gay Premier League footballer while they're actually playing football. There was one who came out after he finished playing football, former Aston Villa and West Ham player Thomas Hitzelsperger, a German international. But there have been no others. Now, there have been some in other parts of the world, an Australian Premier League footballer, but I mean, Australia, should we say, is not renowned for its football expertise. So I don't know why this is, but it certainly doesn't encourage any footballer to come out. And I'm not saying that they should. I mean, it's got to be an individual decision. My own view is that the first one that does is going to be treated like not a pariah, but like a king. And I'm sure their agents will all say, you can't do this because all of your commercial contracts will disappear. I think absolutely the opposite. But, I mean, who knows? You can't actually say for definite that would happen. 0345 6060 973. Let's take a couple of WhatsApp messages here. It's very interesting on subjects like these. You often get lots and lots of texts and WhatsApp messages from people. Less so on the phones, but if you call now, you will get through. Let's hear from Duncan in Manchester. I agree that people shouldn't be forced to wear a symbol against their will. However, it does feel hypocritical where players object to this, but will happily wear a gambling sponsor on their shirt when that's against their religion too. Well, I think there was one or two Newcastle players who had a problem with the fact that their club at that point, were they being sponsored by Wonga or the payday loan company? I think there was an issue there with one or two players refusing to wear that. You've also had, and there's a text here which I want to read. This is it. Here we are. It's from Simon, who says, the funny thing is, I bet you were one of those people mouthing off the most when the footballer James McLean refused to wear a poppy. James McLean is from Derry, Londonderry, and chooses not to wear a poppy each November because of his family's experiences during the Troubles. I think that's a simplified version. He won't sort of stand up for the national anthem, all that sort of thing. Now, you're actually wrong when you say that I was mouthing off against him. I find it disappointing that on that subject, where we remember people who've given their lives for this country in not just the Second World War, but all throughout history, I do find it disappointing when anyone wouldn't commemorate people in that way by having a poppy on their football shirt. But it is his right not to. And I wouldn't want to remove that right for him. I think, we talked about this at the time, there is such a thing that people call poppy fascism. And I don't subscribe to this sort of edict that, like, from the middle of October now, we all have to wear a poppy. I don't wear one until the 1st of November. Very happy to wear one in the 10 days in the run-up to Remembrance Sunday. But I'm not going to try and dictate to the likes of James McLean that he should have to wear a poppy to show respect. If he disrespects our armed forces, that reflects on him. And people can draw their own conclusions. But I think you've got to be consistent on this. Just as I don't condemn him for that, I don't condemn footballers who refuse to wear rainbow laces, even though, personally, I would like to see them do so in solidarity with maybe some of their teammates and also the fans who support their clubs. One of the interesting developments over the past few years is that virtually every Premier League club, and I think it's probably the same in the lower leagues, they all have a sort of a gay group within them. In West Ham, it's called the Pride of Irons. Get it? Pride of Light? Yeah, okay. I'm not active in that. I've never been to any of their meetings, but I'm glad they exist. Because, and apparently West Ham has the highest proportion of gay football fans of any club in the Premier League. I don't know how they know that, but that is apparently the case. And those football fans have a right to be heard and a right to be respected, just as any other group. 0345 6060 973.
Iain Dale on LBC.
9:34 on LBC. We've got some calls here, so do not fear, but we'd love some more. 0345 6060 973. Do symbolic gestures like these rainbow laces and armbands help to tackle discrimination, or are they increasingly counterproductive? A text here from I can't read the name here. It's a mix of letters. I agree people shouldn't be forced to wear a symbol against their will. However, it does feel hypocritical when players object against this, but will happily... Oh, no, we've already done that one, haven't we? Let's go to Sarah, who's a new caller in Wolverhampton. Hello, Sarah.
Hiya, you're right.
Hello. What would you like to say?
So I just, obviously, as a Muslim revert myself and studied into Islam, I don't think being, sorry for using the word gay or bisexual, is actually the worst sin you can commit. But my only problem I have with this is it's an enforced agenda. It's like you must accept, you must. You can't question, you can't ask questions, you can't have an opinion. It's a must in everything, really. I mean, in the NHS, they had to wear the rainbow. Now it's in football. What's next?
Well, as I say, I don't believe that people should be forced to wear these symbols. But if you believe that gay people deserve equality in society, why wouldn't you?
No, I think they deserve respect. And people need to respect their choices, and we should all live in harmony like the way they live with us. But I just don't, I'm not with the agenda of forcing it upon children, upon now footballers. It's just not necessary. It's really not necessary, because at the end of the day, it's just we live all in the UK and we all coexist, different cultures, different beliefs, and they should have the same respect, but at the same time, it shouldn't be in a way where people are under pressure, because if they don't do it, then they might lose their career. Or does that make sense?
Look, I agree with that part of what you say, because I don't think people should be forced to do anything against their will. But I still have to question why people find this such a difficult thing. I mean, it's a sort of slightly nuanced position, isn't it? But when you said that you think that people's choices should be respected, I mean, my immediate response to you on that is, well, it's not a choice, is it? I mean, being gay is not a choice.
No,
you either are or you're not.
I mean, for the society, because, we are in 2024, but at the same time, we still have a society from back, I think, in the 70s and the 60s and stuff, and they still look at it differently. And then there's also kids that have been grown up in such households. So me, myself, I grew up in the Netherlands, and there it's just a normal thing for us. It's nothing. I don't look at it any different, or I don't look at the person any different. Do you know what I mean? But then coming to the UK, it's like it's now explored, and people are actually waking up that there is gay people. But for me, I've lived amongst them since I was young, and I've not treated them any different. Does that make sense? Because who am I to judge?
How old were you, Sarah, when you left the Netherlands?
I think I was 19, yeah.
Where's your Dutch accent gone?
In Britain. Sunk in Britain for the Flying Dutchman.
See, I would love to have a Dutch accent. I think it's fabulous. Sarah, thank you very much indeed for that. Emmanuel says, Iain, I can't believe I'm hearing this. I'm a gay man. I can't help thinking that if people want to settle here, they should accept our values. If I refuse to support an Islamic player because he's a Muslim, it would be wrong. So why should Muslim players be allowed to not accept LGBT people? Well, I think you're reading a little bit too much into it. It doesn't mean to say that you don't accept them, but if you are devoutly religious, and I think we can spread this across many religions, whether you're a fundamentalist Christian, whether you are a devout Muslim, I accept that you are not going to believe that people being gay is something that they are born like. You're going to think that they've made a so-called lifestyle choice, and however much I tell you as a gay man that it is not a choice, why would someone choose to make their life more difficult than it otherwise would be? I think that's the key fact here. As much as I can say that till I'm blue in the face, I recognise that you will say, yes, but my God tells me something different. And if you believe blindly in what your God tells you or what your religious text tells you, though having said that, I don't think there's anything in the Quran that discriminates against homosexuality. I think, then you are going to always disagree with me. I would like to think that your own lived experience would tell you that gay people are just as much of a value to society as anybody else. But it's a long road to equality. And the question here is, do these kind of inclusivity campaigns actually help inclusion or damage it? Let's go to Jim, who's in North Hill in Bedfordshire. Hello, Jim.
Hi, Ian. How you doing?
Good, thank you. What would you like to say?
Good. I was just going to say, I was having this conversation and I picked up on what you said about, people like agents and sponsors and saying, we're going to drop them. I think I totally agree with you. I think, I'm a straight man. I've got friends who are gay, and I was having this conversation with one the other day. I'm not really into football, but I said to him, he's been trying to do some work with the FA and trying to do some promotion stuff. And I said, why aren't there any openly gay footballers? And he said, I said, they're missing a trick. I think any openly gay footballer I think they would get so many sort of deals and sponsorship. And the thing is, he said, probably, they might, every time they touch the ball, people might be sort of booing and, jeering or making some sort of comment, and I said, but football grounds are really, really, really well cameraed up. They've got literally thousands of cameras and they basically could quite easily, I would imagine, identify people that were committing any sort of hate crime or anything like that, and they'd be able to obviously suspend them or give them a complete ban from the ground for good, So I think that any openly gay Premier footballers who are listening to this, I think you're missing a trick, personally.
Well, I could not agree with you more. I wrote essentially a short story on this for Attitude magazine about 10 years ago about a fictional account looking into the future of what would happen to the first gay footballer. I'm going to find it on my website in a moment.
It didn't do Tom Davies' career any harm, did it, as an international sportsman?
No, it didn't. I'm not sure you can compare swimming. I mean, it's a very individual sport, isn't it, to football, which is obviously a team sport. I think that it's difficult to compare. But I agree with you that I think that the commercial opportunities for the first openly gay footballer would be absolutely massive. And I don't think that there would be a bad crowd reaction. And if there was, I suspect the noise would be drowned out by people who would then start cheering.
Be able to police it now. I mean, I've worked in some football grounds and I was amazed that every square inch of the ground is on camera. Everywhere. They can pinpoint down to individual seats, and it really is so well policed now. And if people were making any lewd comments or like negative comments, I think they'd easily be spotted in the crowd, and they could be identified. There's all this facial recognition stuff. So I don't think it would be an issue.
Well, with Corey's permission, after the break, I'm going to read out this short story. It'll take about 5 minutes, but I think it'll make the point and hopefully maybe balance up a little bit of the argument that some people want to have about this. Jim, thank you very much indeed. Now, Alan says, I'm a gay man. I despair of gay people being thrown into the LGBT plus label. I don't support Q, and I have a major issue with the trans ideology, as do many other gay men and lesbians. I don't mind a footballer objecting to trans. They were right to do so. There is no reason for them to object to gay people as such. Well, I mean, that's a very complex view, Alan. You don't object to them having issues with trans ideology, but you do have an issue with them objecting to gay people. There is a bit of hypocrisy going on there, I think. Thank you very much for that. Ranjit is in Albury. Hello, Ranjit.
Hiya, you okay, Ian? Ian,
I'm fine.
Okay, I've got no problems whatsoever, but everybody seems to speak about gay and lesbian people in the third person. That's the first thing I've noticed in this your program. They got them people, they're human beings. You don't have to talk about them like that for a start. Look at the flack people had when they were taking the knee, when they were wearing the rainbow colours. I think people have they've become afraid of being inclusive and trying to help our fellow human beings. I mean, look at the politicians. You know, they were all being called woke. So if I went to the Birmingham Gay Parade, and I'm not gay, and I went with my friends to support him, I'm going to get so much flack. And that's what's killed it in the last 4 or 5 years, I think. And the politics have got a lot to do with it, in my opinion. You know, when people were taking the knee, what happened to Gary Lineker or anybody like that? They just killed it.
Well, of course, there were black players who did not take the knee because they objected to it. There weren't many, but there were some.
I agree with you that nobody should be forced into doing anything that they don't want to do. That's fine, right? And when someone says, well, if you've come into this country and you're not going to behave the way this country... No, that's your freedom of choice. You don't have to do anything. But being called woke and the right-wing media really focusing on that, Ranjit's become woke, Iain's become woke, has put people back into the closet of not trying to help their fellow human beings, in my opinion. That's what's killed it. And it's a sad state of affairs. I think in the last 10 years, I mean, I went to an all-boys school and now I'm 59 years old, so I was brought up the old way where it was all different. But like now, recently, with my kids talking to me, my youngest son is 28, they're not racist. They don't see gay or anything like that. They see a fellow human being. But this wokeness and this new phrase, I don't know where it came from, but that's the worst thing that was introduced to the right-wing media, woke. And the sooner we get rid of this woke, the quicker we're going to get our rainbow flag back and help our fellow human beings. And that's how I really feel. I feel really awkward about this, and it makes me so angry, right, that the right-wing media has taken over and not helping our fellow human beings.
Okay, Ranjit, thank you.
And people bring religion into it, yeah. They don't even need to bring religion. All it is one form of prejudice, because this takes me back to the 1970s when I used to walk to school. I used to get called the P word. And it's just another version of that now.
Okay, Ranjit, thank you very much indeed. Anastasia says, just wondering if you've met Elton John, Ian. I have. No, I haven't met Elton John, it has to be said. Sorry to upset your wealth of knowledge, but the first gay footballer has already come out. It was Justin Fashanu, says Simon. That was back in, 1989, when the Premier League didn't exist. And I think I did specifically say Premier League footballer. And of course, I think a lot of because of what happened to Justin Fashanu, a lot of other footballers were put off from doing that. Javed says, as a Muslim, I don't accept being gay. So, this is different to not accepting gay people. I would intervene if anyone attacks or discriminates against a gay person, but at the same time, I should not be forced to celebrate gay values. What on earth is a gay value? I mean, I've been gay all my life, but I don't know what a gay value is. I have morals, I have societal values. I don't think being gay affects my sense of morality or values at all. Javed, do give me a call. I would really like to hear what you mean by saying that. I'm not going to have a go at you. I just want to understand what you mean by that. 0345 6060 973.
Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
Jackanory.
Are we sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. This is a story I wrote in April 2015. He hadn't told anyone, not even his agent. It was going to be done on his own terms. Adam Ranger hadn't told his mother what he was about to do, and he especially hadn't told his gossipy sister. They would all find out like the rest of the country. Had he told any of them, he knew they would come out with all sorts of reasons why he shouldn't go ahead with what he knew would affect him for the rest of his life. You see, Adam Ranger, star England central defender, was about to announce to the world he was gay. He knew the risks. He was prepared for the media storm that would no doubt engulf him. People who do something first always become renowned. Adam was prepared for that. What he didn't want to become was notorious. He calculated that if he did it, others would follow suit, and follow suit quickly. He knew that in every dressing room up and down the land, there were men like him. Indeed, he knew of one Premier League team where 4 of the starting 11 were gay. It wasn't as if anyone was particularly secret any longer. Looks were exchanged, people just knew, but rarely said anything. Adam had thought long and hard about how to do it. Press conference? No, too uncontrollable. Newspaper exclusive? No. The other newspapers which hadn't had the story would be angry and seek to trash him. TV or radio? Maybe, but would he get the time to say what he wanted to say? Would he be able to control the editing? Probably not. No, Adam decided to do a Tom Daley and record his own YouTube video. After training one day, he went down to PC World, bought a video camera and tripod. "All right, Adam," said the sales assistant. "Got the girls coming round, have we?" he joshed, with a deliberate wink. "Yeah, something like that," smiled Adam. If only you knew, mate, he thought to himself. He went home, set up the camera, sat down and looked straight into the lens. "I'm Adam Ranger. I play for England, and I've got something I want to tell you." 4 weeks later. It had been a momentous month. The praise, the almost entirely positive reaction from his own teammates who had lined up after training and done a collective moonie while laughing heartily. The phone calls from players from other clubs, his England teammates, had been a mixture of hilarious, emotional and highly charged. Tears were shed. 3 other international players followed Adam's lead in the week after he came out to the world. A dozen lower league players did too, and all to an ever-increasing shrug of the shoulder. In his first game after the video release on YouTube, Adam ran out at Upton Park, a difficult place, you can tell this was 9 years ago, a difficult place for an opposition player at the best of times, to a standing ovation from most of the crowd. He hadn't bargained for that, and for a moment lost his composure. As the applause died down, a chant started from the Bobby Moore stand of, "Does your boyfriend know you're here?" Adam laughed, grabbed the hand of one of his teammates and bowed. The applause restarted. Yes, there were problems. He knew there would be. His agent was furious with him. "You've jeopardised all of your commercial contracts by doing this," he fumed. Adam suspected the very opposite would be true, and he was right. The offers flooded in. "We want you to be the face of our company," said the chief exec of a major clothing brand. And there was more. Lots more. And then I end this by saying back in the room. And that's how I'd like to think things would be if a professional footballer took that great leap. OK, I might be writing with rose-tinted spectacles, but I genuinely think it would be a lot more like this scenario than it was for Justin Fashanu 25 years ago, now 35 years ago. I have no idea how many professional footballers read Attitude magazine, probably more than you think. But if there's only one, think about the trail you would blaze. Think about what kind of example you would set, not just to your fellow footballers, but everyone else. Be proud of who and what you are and tell the world. So that was what I wrote in 2015. I would stand by every single word of that. And I'm just really, really sorry that it hasn't happened. Now, Corey was against me doing that, but I overruled him. So sorry, Corey. Carolyn. Oh, no, Carolyn has just gone. No, she's back in Oxford. Hello, Carolyn.
Hi, Ian. Hi. I just don't understand why people are so uptight about other people's sexuality. You are what you are, and it shouldn't affect football or any other thing that you do in your life.
Totally agree. But why do you think that there is still this idea among some people that it's something to be ashamed of?
Because people probably are scared of it.
Why? Why do you think they're scared?
Well, maybe some of it they have in their own mind. Maybe they think maybe they are a little bit like that. Maybe. Who knows? I don't know. All I'm saying is that if you're a footballer or if you're a rugby player or if you're anything else in your walk of life, and if your sexuality is different from anyone else's, that's heterosexual or bisexual or gay or lesbian or whatever, that's your life. That's how you are, and it should be respected. But I do think the media screws things up quite a lot.
In what way?
By going on about it and advertising, or not advertising, but saying it to other people, etc. If you're a footballer and you're gay, then that's fine. But it's football we're talking about. We're not talking about your sexuality. So long as you can do football and you like it, that's great. So why should it be such a big deal?
Well, I don't think it should be a big deal. And my worry here is that this whole story about these three players who have decided not to either wear the armband or to write slogans over it or whatever, it's actually being very counterproductive. And if the clubs or if the FA had just let it go, we wouldn't even be talking about it now, because probably we wouldn't even know.
Which is exactly my point. If you are gay or lesbian or whatever, that's fine. That's your life. That's how you feel. That's your sexuality. That's how you've been born and how you feel. That's absolutely fine. So why, again, the media maybe got hold of this, and that's why we know about it. That's what I'm trying to say.
And you said it very well, Carolyn, thank you. Alexandra says, Ian, the sad fact is that gay acceptance has been forced back a long way in the last decade by the rise of the hard right in Europe and the US, which includes Trump, Orban, PIS in Poland, and Boris Johnson, and they're railing against the crass term woke, which is just as bad as TERF. Johnson, remember, completely got away with his bum boys in tank top slur for being Boris just being Boris. On another point, you have to remember that Boris Johnson was actually the first MP in the 2001 Parliament to promote the concept of gay marriage. So, anyway, that's what it's worth. On another point, the texter Alan is a disgusting hypocrite for dismissing transgender people while considering his own status sacrosanct. The phobes don't make distinctions, so it's incredibly stupid for these so-called factions to fight amongst themselves. Well, thank you for all of your calls and messages this evening. I'll be back tomorrow from 7. If you missed any of this evening's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts, including the whole show podcast for this show, which will be available for you shortly. Download now for free from your App Store or head to globalplayer.com. And of course, on the All Talk podcast tonight, you can listen to my hour-long interview with Nadine Dorris about her new book Downfall, which, believe me, it's quite a spicy interview. 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 It's quite a spicy interview.